Chapter 671. Xiao Wanru had already arrived in the courtyard. As soon as she sat down, she heard Madame of Duke Xing summon her. She drank a cup of tea slowly and went to Madame of Duke Xing's courtyard with Yu Jie and Qing Er. As soon as she entered the yard, she saw a few coarse old maids lined up outside the main room, staring at her fiercely. When they entered the house, there were also two people lined up inside. Madame of Duke Xing, who was sitting in the chair, had been waiting with a livid face and was fuming with anger. When she saw Xiao Wanru come in, she slapped the table hard and said angrily, "Guards, take down this girl who plotted against Big Sister and beat her 20 times. Thinking of the news from Xiao Yanru that Xiao Yanru had fainted again, Madame of Duke Xing was so angry that her eyes went crazy. Xiao Wanru, the daughter she had raised with great charm, had fallen into such a situation. How could she not hate Xiao Wanru and want to beat her to death? The two old maids in the room were about to step forward. Qing Er and Yu Jie hurriedly stood in front of her. Xiao Wanru sneered, looked up at Madame of Duke Xing, who was so angry that she lost her mind, and said, "Second Madam, what do you mean? I don't know how I offended you and made you come to kill me. No matter how bad I am the descendant of great elder princess. Not everyone can kill me if they want." Calling her second madam was especially impolite. The two rough old maids looked at each other and couldn't help but stop. It was right for them to listen to Madame of Duke Xing, but they couldn't use their lives to stop her. Just now, they only thought that Madame was the master of the backyard, but they didn't think that the fifth miss was not only the descendant of Duke Xing's mansion. Fight. If anything happens, I will take the responsibility. This is Duke Xing's mansion, not Rui and Great Elder Princess's mansion. Even Great Elder Princess can't intervene in the matter of teaching the younger generation in other mansions a lesson. Seeing that the two old maids were frightened, Madame of Duke Xing screamed in anger. At this time, she really hated Xiao Wanru and wished she could kill Xiao Wanru on the spot to avenge her daughter. The two old maids hesitated for a moment and had to continue moving forward. Impudent! Why don't you take a look at who you are? If you dare to stretch your hand out, I'll chop off your hand and feed it to the dogs. Before they got close, Qing had shouted harshly and pushed hard. The old maid in the front could not stand. Her fat body took a heavy step back and bumped into the old maid behind her. The two old maids tripped over each other and rolled together. Madame of Duke Xing pounded the table, stood up, and said sternly, "How dare you disobey your elders?" An elder? Xiao Wanru pushed away the two maids in front of her and stepped forward slowly with a smile on her face. However, the smile was very cold and inexplicably chilling. "Madam, you really think too highly of yourself. My mother is Infanta Qinghua, and my father is the heir of Duke Xing's mansion. Madam, as an elder, you want to kill me? Madam, you have been in charge of the inner court of Duke Xing's mansion for a long time, so you really think that the whole world belongs to Duke Xing's mansion and you can kill whoever you want." Her words were very light and almost gentle, but the meaning in her words made Madame of Duke Xing feel as if a basin of ice had been poured over her head. She felt cold all over, and the energy just now almost dissipated. How dare she admit such rebellious words? You dare to say such words? Aren't you afraid of killing without mercy? Madame of Duke Xing said in a trembling voice with a pale face. Xiao Wanru's words were not only rebellious, but also rebellious. Even Duke Xing's mansion could not resist it. "Second Madam, are you afraid of such words? You even dare to meddle in the palace. When Miss Wang was injured, someone in the palace should have helped you, right? It's the same this time. I don't know which concubine in the palace has been helping you." Xiao Wanru took a few steps forward with a cold look in her eyes. 3 years ago, Wang Yishu suddenly fainted in the palace. If it hadn't been for someone's reminder, how could she have fainted in the Imperial Institute of Medicine for so long? Madame of Duke Xing hadn't heard the title, Second Madam, for many years. At this time, when Xiao Wanru mentioned it, she felt a little creepy, as if something had broken out of the ground and could not be controlled. You are presumptuous. Come on, gagged the fifth Miss's mouth, lest she say something rebellious. Although Madame of Duke Xing's soft spot had been stabbed, after all, she had been in charge of the family for many years and was no longer the cousin miss who had been raised in the mansion. After calming down a little, she scolded harshly. It seemed that she had to speed up the process of dealing with Wang Yishu. She couldn't let Wang Yishu, the scourge, live. No one had mentioned it before, so she could do it a little slower and more naturally. But now she couldn't do it. There was a trace of ruthlessness in her eyes. Come on, gag the fifth Miss's mouth, drag her away, and punish her with a rod. Seeing that Madame of Duke Xing was in a weak position, Nanny Xing immediately raised her voice and shouted. Several rough old maids guarding the door hesitated for a moment, but still walked in. They were all tall and strong, and it could be seen that they were very strong. How dare you? Yujia looked at the few old maids coming over warily and said sternly. The fifth miss has spoken arrogantly, which may harm the whole mansion. Madam deserves to punish her. Nanny Xing sneered and said without giving in. She was not only Madame of Duke Xing's henchman, but also Duke Xing's wet nurse. Naturally, she was very dignified in the mansion. How could she allow a little servant girl to suppress her? Seeing that Nanny Xing was very powerful, several rough old maids immediately became bold and came to Xiao Wanru with fierce faces. Qing wanted to take action, but Xiao Wanru reached out to grab her sleeve and shook it secretly. She couldn't let others find out that Qing knew martial arts. She brought Yujia and Qing here to make others think that Qing was just a servant girl with greater strength than ordinary people, just like Yujia. Qing understood what Xiao Wanru meant, nodded at her silently, took a few steps forward, and blocked a few old maids who pounced on them fiercely with Yujia. Although there were many rough old maids, Qing and Yujia were strong, especially Qing Although she could not show off her martial arts skills, she could press their acupoints. She did not use much strength, so the old maid's hands and feet were sore and weak for no reason, and they could not use their strength. With her secret action, Qing and Yujia barely blocked a few old maids. Xiao Wanru stepped forward with her jade-like delicate face with a fierce murderous look. Her long eyelashes fluttered, and her eyes seemed to be immersed in 10,000-year-old ice. Second madam, do you really think that you can do whatever you want in Duke Xing's mansion? Everything in the future belongs to Hao. You are just temporarily in charge of the internal affairs. Hao is the only master in the future. You are not the master, so don't try in vain. Madam of Duke Xing. Is it really a joke? These words came out of Xiao Wanru's mouth word by word with fierce hostility. Madam of Duke Xing was so scared that her face turned pale at first, and then she trembled with anger. It took her a lot of effort to climb to the position of Madam of Duke Xing, which was not known to others. Thinking that everything she had painstakingly gained would eventually belong to others, how could she not be angry? She clenched the railing of the big mahogany chair tightly with her fingers, and her teeth were almost embedded in her flesh. At this moment, there was only one crazy idea in her mind, which was to take Xiao Wanru and her younger brother away and beat them to death. Duke Xing's mansion belonged to her, and it could only belong to her. Thinking of this, the corner of her eyes twitched twice, and she couldn't help screaming loudly, "Everything in this mansion belongs to me, and the future heir of Duke Xing can only be my son. I don't know if you and Xiao Yuanhao, the little bastard, are the children of the heir of Duke Xing. Who knows if you were born by Infanta Qinghua who didn't abide by the rules of a woman? How can you inherit Duke Xing's mansion?" Madam of Duke Xing's obsession was her son's position as the heir of Duke Xing. She had worked hard for so many years in order to let her son take over Duke Xing's mansion smoothly. How could she allow Xiao Wanru and her younger brother to rush out and ruin her plan? It turned out that there was such a plan. Xiao Wanru's face showed a trace of fierceness, and she had figured out some conjectures in her heart. No wonder old Madam's attitude was so strange. She didn't seem to treat her real granddaughter at all. It turned out that she had such an idea. Thinking that her father and mother had been driven to death, but they still doubted their innocence after death. Xiao Wanru wanted to cut Madame of Duke Xing in front of her. She always felt that there seemed to be something fishy in the whole Duke Xing's mansion. It turned out that the problem was here. If she hadn't forced Madame of Duke Xing to tell the truth today, she would never know why she, as a granddaughter, was treated like this and brother Hao was raised to be disabled. Slap. The fierce slap didn't hit Madame of Duke Xing's face, but hit the face of Nanny Sheng, who was standing in front of her. Then Nanny Sheng's feet went soft, and she tripped over something. She fell back heavily, and her fat body directly pressed on Madame of Duke Xing, causing Madame of Duke Xing to scream. Nanny Sheng, get out of the way. I'll ask second Madame to make it clear what she means. Xiao Wanru reached out to grab Nanny Sheng's neck, and then pressed her back hard. Seeing the hairpin on Nanny Sheng's head stabbed into Madame of Duke Xing's face, she pulled it hard again. Immediately, a sharp bloodstain appeared on Madame of Duke Xing's snow-white face. Ah! Madame of Duke Xing screamed in pain and tried desperately to push Nanny Sheng away. However, most of Nanny Sheng's body was pressed on her, so she couldn't get up for a while. Come on, take this person away. Madame of Duke Xing said loudly, while kicking Nanny Sheng's foot hard, trying to kick Nanny Sheng away from her body. Nanny Sheng screamed in pain and struggled. Not only did she fail to break free, but she also lost her strength and pressed on Madame of Duke Xing's body, making Madame of Duke Xing scream repeatedly. Everyone was stunned. They almost couldn't believe what was happening in front of them and didn't know what to do next. What happened here? Why did I hear Madame of Duke Xing cursing so viciously from a distance? Old Madam, is this the Madam of your mansion? I've never seen such a disgraceful noble madam who behaves like a shrew in the marketplace. Duke Xing's mansion is really different. Chapter 672. Remember in 1 second, 800 mail sign /say net. This is a wonderful free reading without a pop-up window. A teasing voice came from the door. The crowd, who were in a mess, turned around in a hurry. The first thing they saw was old Madame's gloomy face, followed by a nanny from the palace, a clever little eunuch, and 2 rows of palace maids behind them, all holding gift boxes in their hands. It was the clever little eunuch who spoke, but the meaning of his words made old Madame's face darken directly. The noise and curses just now, especially the sharp voice of Madame of Duke Xing, had been heard from a distance. Madame of Duke Xing's vicious words had been heard by these people. The people from the palace had come to give Xiao Wanru a reward. Originally, they were going to send it to Xiao Wanru's Piaoyuan courtyard, but on the way, they heard that Xiao Wanru had gone to Madame of Duke Xing's courtyard, so the people from the palace changed their direction. The nanny sent by the palace was a servant of the Empress Dowager. In order to show her solemnity, old Madame specially accompanied her. Unexpectedly, she saw the scene in front of her. At this time, she was angry and hateful. She rolled her eyes and fainted directly. Then there was another chaos. Someone screamed, "Old Madam," and someone went to help Madame of Duke Xing. However, Xiao Wanru stepped aside and watched the farce in front of her, with a stern look on her pink little face. Old Madam was finally called over. Sitting in the chair, Nanny Yu patted her on the back to help her breathe. On the other side, Nanny Sheng had been pulled away. Madame of Duke Xing finally recovered. Holding the table, she panted hard, and her eyes were full of panic. At this time, she also felt that the situation was not good, and only thought about how to smooth it over. Xiao Xuanzi and the nanny beside the Empress Dowager looked at everything in front of them coldly and sat down in chairs on one side. Second aunt, what do you mean by saying that Hao and I are bastards? What do you mean by not knowing whether we are the children of our father? If you can't make it clear today, I will go with you to the Empress Dowager and make it clear. Xiao Wanru took 2 steps forward and stared at Madame of Duke Xing with a face full of anger. It seemed that Madame of Duke Xing would not give up until she made it clear. Madame of Duke Xing panicked. If she really provoked the Empress Dowager, she would definitely be in trouble. Wanru. I was dizzy just now, talking nonsense. Well, your second aunt is talking nonsense because your eldest sister had an accident in the palace today. Old Madam said. She had to admit that if Xiao Wanru really brought Madam of Duke Xing into the imperial palace, she would not be able to get any benefits, and it was even more likely that what happened today would be involved. What happened today was neither a big nor a small matter. If it was used by someone with ulterior motives, the entire Duke Xing's mansion would be doomed eternally. Thinking of this, Old Madam felt that her whole heart was in her throat, hanging there, as if there was a knife on her neck. In order to keep the peace, she did not dare to cause any trouble. At this time, Old Madam also secretly hated the people of the Empress Dowager and Prince Chen. No matter from which aspect, these two people would stand on Xiao Wanru's side. She could not ignore Xiao Wanru's words. Otherwise, after they returned to the imperial palace, they would definitely provoke the anger of the Empress Dowager and Prince Chen. Xiao Wanru said softly, "Old Madam, I was also frightened in the imperial palace today and almost had an accident. In this case, can I also say in the mansion that my big brother and big sister are not the children of my second uncle but the bastard children of my second madam?" She sneered in her heart. This kind of words could be said when she was temporarily fooled and frightened. In this case, could she also say the same? Nonsense. Madam of Duke Xing was furious and slammed the table with her hand. How dare you, a weak girl in boudoir, say this kind of words? Old Madam's eyes also became fierce and she scolded her sternly. Old Madam and Madam of Duke Xing are really interesting. Can you say that the fifth miss can't say it? When His Highness sent me here today, he said that if anyone in this mansion dares to bully the fifth miss, it will be the same as bullying His Highness. He asked me to decide whether to throw the person out or break his leg. Xiao Xuanzi sneered and said. He was Chu Liuchen's personal eunuch, so he was not comparable to ordinary people. There was a trace of ruthlessness on his smiling face. He slammed the table with his hand, and the teacup on the table jumped up and then fell to the ground, making a crisp sound of broken porcelain. A little eunuch dared to be arrogant in her mansion. Old Madam was furious. When she was about to speak, Nanny Yu pulled her clothes hard. She turned her head and glared at Nanny Yu angrily, only to see Nanny Yu winking at her, and she mainly winked in one direction. Old Madam looked in the direction where Nanny Yu winked and immediately saw the nanny beside the Empress Dowager. Although the nanny didn't say anything, even if she just sat there, she still had a deterrent effect. Taking a deep breath, Old Madam showed a kind expression on her face and said, "Wanru, don't be angry. I will reprimand your second aunt for this. She shouldn't say such words at any time. Come on, ask Madam to go to the ancestral hall. She should kneel there tonight and don't come out. As a noble madam, how can she do such a thing?" "Mother!" Madam of Duke Xing exclaimed. She had always been the one who punished people to kneel in the ancestral hall. When did it become her turn? Not to mention the physical pain, she also felt ashamed. She was the wife of the supervisor of the backyard and had the title of honorary lady. If she really kneeled for such a night, she would not have so much prestige when dealing with servants in the future. Old Madam is really clear about rewards and punishments. After returning to the palace, I will report to the Empress Dowager. The nanny in the palace looked at Madam of Duke Xing coldly and said slowly. Of course. Old Madam breathed a sigh of relief in her heart. As long as the Empress Dowager did not pursue it, she could talk about other things later. Come on, take Madam away. Two rough old maids came forward to pull Madam of Duke Xing. Madam of Duke Xing was dissatisfied and wanted to struggle. But when she saw Old Madam's cold eyes, she unconsciously shivered, hurriedly lowered her head, and did not dare to struggle anymore. After the two rough old maids took Madam of Duke Xing away, Old Madam's face softened a little. She looked at Xiao Wanru gently and said, Wanru, so many things have happened in the palace today. You are really tired. It happens that the palace has sent some gifts. You can go and receive them yourself. At this time, Old Madam was very unwilling to see Xiao Wanru. She just wanted to send her far away, so she didn't even care about the gifts given by the Empress Dowager. Now she just wanted to turn big things into small things and small things into nothing. Grandma, is what second aunt said true? Xiao Wanru raised a pair of watery eyes and looked at old madam in front of her with burning eyes. There seemed to be thick dark clouds rolling at the bottom of her eyes, making her eyes inexplicably deep. You little girl, don't be so persistent. How could what your second aunt said be true? Old madam became impatient. Huyen said. Grandma, don't blame me for being persistent. It's just that second aunt has always disliked me and is malicious to me and brother Hao. If I don't figure out the truth, I'm afraid that I will die without knowing how. Xiao Wanru insisted. After saying that, she knelt down in the hall and said with tears and determination, Grandma, please do me justice. What nonsense are you talking about? When did your second aunt dislike you? Old madam was confused and said angrily. This granddaughter of hers was not good at reading people's eyes. At this time, she even asked such a question. How could she say whether she liked her or not? How could she distinguish it so clearly? Grandma, you don't believe me? Xiao Wanru asked. Well, don't say such childish words. Your second aunt did make a mistake today because of your big sister. What she said before was also nonsense. You can't take it seriously. Old madam reached out to touch her head and closed her eyes slightly. She really felt annoyed, tired, and in a bad mood. If she had known that such a thing would happen, she should not have come just now. Out of sight, out of mind. If it really came to her, she could pretend that she did not see it. Grandma, I have evidence. How could Xiao Wanru let go of such a good opportunity? When she left the imperial palace, she specially asked Chu Luqian to send someone here. It would be better if he brought someone from the Empress Dowager with him. After returning to the mansion, she wanted to make trouble and let the people around the Empress Dowager see it. As expected, Madame of Duke Xing, who was enraged by her, immediately brought out a lot of words. With the people in the imperial palace as witnesses, old Madame could not erase this matter even if she wanted to. What evidence do you have? Old Madame was really annoyed by Xiao Wanru's unforgiving attitude and said angrily. Seeing that old Madame could not hold back her anger, Xiao Wanru looked very calm. No matter what she did or how she compromised, it was the same in old Madame's eyes. In this case, it had nothing to do with her whether she was angry or not. In the last life, old Madame could cover her eyes and pretend not to see the miserable end of her and how. Now she would not have much affection for her because she was her biological grandmother. The affection between her and the people of Duke Xing's mansion had been cold as early as in the last life. Since it had been cold, why should she care about old Madame's attitude? Grandma, this nanny and Xiao Xuanzi, please come with me. Xiao Wanru bowed deeply to old Madame in a natural manner, and then bowed to the nanny and Xiao Xuanzi beside the Empress Dowager and said with a gentle look. Originally, she wanted to find an opportunity to deal with the decoration in the courtyard. Since people from the imperial palace came, wasn't it better than other opportunities? Seeing that the nanny and Xiao Xuanzi in the imperial palace actually got up, old Madame could only help nanny you get up at this time even though she was full of indignation. She would like to see what the evidence Xiao Wanru mentioned was. If it was not evidence at all or could not prove anything at all, she would definitely reprimand her this time. She would also punish this girl to kneel in the ancestral hall and let her know who was in charge of the mansion. Chapter 673. The dilapidated screen was so wide that it was almost luxurious, but it was also so dilapidated that it was almost messy. There were always tables and chairs missing. Either this place was worn to the point that the wood underneath was exposed, or there were many scratches in another place. Even the teacups that were served didn't seem to be the same, they were broken. After Xiao Wanru moved in, old Madame had never come to see it. When Madame of Duke Xing arranged it, she had come to see it and felt very satisfied with it as the wedding room for her eldest grandson. But now everything in front of her made her feel unreal. Was this really the Piaoying courtyard? How could it be so dilapidated? It was so dilapidated that she felt ashamed. Her face turned red, partly because of anger and partly because of shyness. Grandma, this is the courtyard that second madam arranged for me. Grandma, do you think this can be the evidence that second madam hates me? Is there any courtyard in the whole Duke Xing's mansion as dilapidated as mine? Even the decoration of the place where the concubine lives in the mansion is better than mine, right? Xiao Wanru's eyes were very cold without anger, only calmness, as if she was not talking about the injustice that Duke Xing's mansion had done to her. I'll ask someone to change it for you when I go back. Old madam gritted her teeth and said angrily. Thank you, Grandma. But big sister also came to see it before, and then she didn't say anything. Xiao Wanru said. She had made up her mind to take this opportunity to finalize the matter. Old madam was not Xiao Yanru. Xiao Yanru could say that she was incompetent and failed to persuade second madam in a short time, but old madam could not make an excuse in such a tone. I'll change it for you in a while. Old madam almost spat out these words through her teeth. Old madam, is Madam of Duke Xing really a noble lady in your mansion? How could she treat the daughter of lineal descent of the eldest branch so coldly? So the daughter of lineal descent of the eldest branch is the real daughter of lineal descent, right? What's more, the fifth miss is the benefactor of His Highness. If it weren't for the fifth miss, His Highness would have been in trouble that time. Did your mansion treat the fifth miss like this on purpose to please someone in the name of His Highness? Xiao Xuanzi said with a smile. His words were neither high nor low, and his voice sounded neither light nor heavy, but in old madam's ears, it was like thunder. Old madam's face changed greatly and her body shook. Nanny Yu quickly held her up. Who dared to trample on Prince Chen's face, and who would risk their lives to trample on him? Although everyone knew that he would not live long, he had survived and lived a good life. With the protection of the Empress Dowager and the Emperor, no one dared to despise him, even though he had a special status. And there were not many people who could humiliate Prince Chen. Moreover, the meaning behind his words wasn't just about whose face he was stepping on. This is all Wanyan's doing. When she comes out, I will ask her to apologize to Wanru. Such a thing will never happen again. Old madam had to promise. Madam Xing's maiden name was euphemistic, but old madam was so angry that she even used her maiden name. In this case, it's the best. These were originally given to the fifth miss by the Empress Dowager and Prince Chen. Now put them down. We still have to report to the Empress Dowager and Prince Chen. The old nanny in the palace stood up and looked at old madam with a bit of scrutiny. Nanny, thank you. Old madam lowered her head and blushed. There was a hint of warning in her words. She, a first-grade madam with the title of honorary madam, was actually warned by the person sent by the Empress Dowager in her own mansion. Thinking about what had happened in her mansion today, she knew that it couldn't be hidden. She was ashamed and annoyed, secretly hating her daughter-in-law for being so ignorant. Even if she didn't like Xiao Wanru to live in the courtyard originally prepared for Xiao Hua, then she couldn't fool people with such broken furniture. Of course, old madam didn't know that when they were just sent in, the furniture was still presentable. The damaged places were often behind some corners, which basically wouldn't be seen by others. After Xiao Wanru moved in, she wantonly made the broken traces on the original foundation and connected them to the outside. So now at a glance, without looking carefully, one could know that the furniture in this room was useless. Now even the Empress Dowager knew about it, which made old madam feel ashamed. Eunuch Xiao Xuanzi, can you leave now? The nanny beside the Empress Dowager asked politely. Everyone knew that Xiao Xuanzi was the most trusted servant of Prince Chen. His identity was different from that of others. Even the Empress Dowager's servants didn't dare to offend him at will. Nanny, please wait a moment. Xiao Xuanzi cupped his hands and said politely. Then he walked to old madam in a few steps, smiled, and also cupped his hands to old madam. Then he took out a snow-white cat from a delicate basket with a lid carried by a palace maid behind him. The cat had long snow-white fur and blue eyes that were almost glazed. It was chubby and very cute, which made people like it. Old madam, this is a gift from His Highness to the fifth miss of your mansion. If it is killed by other masters in your mansion in the future, His Highness will not tolerate her. This cat is very sensible and basically won't scratch people. But if someone deliberately provokes it, it won't be polite. Xiao Xuanzi said with a smile and held the cat in his arms to show it to old madam. Old madam originally liked this cat, but when she heard Xiao Xuanzi's words, her face turned cold. Since this cat will hurt people, please take it back. There are many girls in our mansion. If someone accidentally provokes this cat and we don't dare to deal with it, it will be troublesome. It seemed that this cat couldn't be touched. How could old madam want this kind of cat? Old madam, you are wrong. This cat is not only the idea of His Highness, but also the idea of Empress Dowager. How can Empress Dowager's reward be returned? Xiao Xuanzi raised his eyebrows calmly and looked at the palace maids who brought gifts. Xiao Wanru almost couldn't help laughing. Of course, she knew this cat. She had raised it for a period of time in Qin's mansion, but later it went back to Prince Chen's mansion. Unexpectedly, it was sent here again and specially became a reward from Empress Dowager. Of course, she couldn't refuse the reward from Empress Dowager. Everything was the emperor's favor, so how could she refuse it? Xiao Xuanzi deliberately took the cat out to show old madam. This cat could be considered to have passed the test. If anything happened in the future, he could naturally ask old madam for help. Although old madam was angry, she had to let Xiao Wanru accept the gift. Now she could only send it to Xiao Wanru, but couldn't take part of it away like last time. How is it? In the Palace of Benevolent Peace, Chu Luqian asked Xiao Xuanzi, who had just come back, lazily. Your Highness, fifth miss is so pitiful. Alas. Xiao Xuanzi looked angry and seemed to want to say something but stopped on second thought. Empress Dowager frowned and looked at her grandson. Seeing that he also frowned, she turned to the nanny she sent unhappily and asked, What did you see? Duke Xing's mansion is really not good and treats fifth miss very badly. In Duke Xing's mansion, although the nanny didn't say a few words, she had been watching and also saw Xiao Wanru's current situation. Speaking of which, she did feel that fifth Miss Xiao was pitiful. Thinking of the first time she went to Madame of Duke Xing's courtyard and heard Madame of Duke Xing's scolding, she felt more and more sorry. She told the Empress Dowager everything she had seen and heard in Duke Xing's mansion. The more the Empress Dowager heard, the angrier she became. Seeing her grandson's pale and handsome face frowning tightly, she couldn't help but feel a little annoyed with old Madame of Duke Xing's mansion. She said that fifth miss and that little one are not the descendants of the former heir of Duke Xing. Empress Dowager said coldly, Come on, give Madame of Duke Xing a ruler and a book of women's precepts, so that she can be more virtuous as a woman in the future and accumulate virtue for future generations. Yes, I'll prepare it right away. The nanny answered and went to prepare. Giving Madame of Duke Xing the precepts and the ruler showed her dissatisfaction with Madame of Duke Xing. The meaning of the Empress Dowager's order was even more effective. Old Madame of Duke Xing's mansion couldn't suppress this matter even if she wanted to. Empress Dowager was furious, and it couldn't be appeased by a mere kneeling in the ancestral hall. Chen, don't be angry. Imperial grandmother will always help her. The nanny left and Empress Dowager comforted her obviously angry grandson. Imperial grandmother, I'm useless. I can't even protect the princess I chose. Chu Luqian lowered his head and said slowly, with a bitter face. What are you talking about, Chen? You are in good health now. When she marries into your mansion, her life will naturally be better. If you want to protect her, you should pay more attention to your health. Don't let your previous efforts be in vain. Empress Dowager comforted him in a soft voice. Imperial grandmother, it's so difficult for her in Duke Xing's mansion. Can you let her marry into Prince Chen's mansion earlier? Chu Luqian raised his head, and his eyes were clear and shimmering, which made Empress Dowager worried. You have to wait until the consort selection. Chen, don't worry. After the consort selection, your mansion will be lively. Not only can you marry into the mansion, but you can also choose a nice concubine and concubine for you. Your health is also much better. It's a blessing in disguise this time. It's a good thing. Empress Dowager said. This was originally against the rules. Chu Luchen was ranked third. Now seeing her grandson's decadent appearance, old madam had no reason to refuse. Chu Luchen shook his head and said with a bitter smile, Imperial grandmother, even if my health is much better, I don't need so many people to marry into the mansion. If so many people come in, they will not serve me. I'm afraid that they will kill me. I just want to protect the girl I like. If there are more people like me, do you think I can still survive? After Chu Luchen finished speaking, he turned his head and coughed in a low voice. Xiao Xuanzi hurriedly patted his back to soothe him. Looking at her grandson's uncomfortable coughing and thinking that there were so many women in the palace, who were either doing this or that every day, it was all about women. Chen Er's health really couldn't stand so many women. She had to discuss with the emperor. This time, she would choose the fifth maid of Duke Xing's mansion first. The rest would be discussed later. When Chu Luchen turned around and wiped the corners of his mouth with a handkerchief, Empress Dowager hurriedly said, It's up to you. It's up to you. You need to take good care of yourself. This body has been ruined for too long. I'm afraid it can't get better. Chu Luchen said with a smile. He was gentle and handsome, but his words made people's noses sour. Chapter 674. Qianqian. The latest chapter on medical skills of the Crown Princess was updated as soon as possible. Duke Xing's mansion was doomed to be unlucky this day. Miss Xiao, who had entered the imperial palace, had an accident, and it was not a small matter. After returning to the mansion, Madame of Duke Xing was punished again and was dragged to the ancestral hall by old Madame. The whole Duke Xing's mansion was in an uproar. Many servants were trembling with fear and did not know what had happened. In addition to the mansion doctor, the most favored first miss also invited a few doctors from outside. It seemed that the first miss had an incurable disease after entering the imperial palace. Madame of Duke Xing, who had always been high and mighty, always had the final say in the whole Duke Xing's mansion. However, it was said that she had offended the fifth miss and was punished to kneel in the ancestral hall. After that, the fifth miss's room of tattered furniture was moved out, which dazzled everyone. Then everyone sighed and thought that it was Madame who had mistreated the fifth Mississippi. The rumors in the past suddenly spread again. Then another thing happened. Miss Qi, who had been detained in the mansion, escaped. Not only did she escape, but she also happened to have an accident. In a hurry, her carriage bumped into the carriages of several families of officials. Hearing that she was the adopted daughter of Madame of Duke Xing, the families of officials wanted to send her back to the mansion for the sake of Madame of Duke Xing. Seeing that the situation was not good, Qi Rongji cried and begged several families of officials. Therefore, everyone knew that Miss Qi, who had been recognized as the adopted daughter, lived a miserable life in Duke Xing's mansion. Not only was she looked down upon by several misses, but they also sneered at her from time to time and even found excuses to beat and scold her. In a word, Qi Rongji did not live a superior life in Duke Xing's mansion. Even the servant girls in Duke Xing's mansion could bully her. Now they even locked her up and planned to marry her to Wang Xingxue, a nephew of Duke Xing's mansion who had a bad reputation. For this reason, she risked her life to escape. In order to win people's trust, Qi Rongji also told them the reason why Madame of Duke Xing recognized her at that time. She said that Madame of Duke Xing had taken a fancy to Xiao Wanru, but Xiao Wanru was unwilling to recognize her as her adopted mother. In order to force Xiao Wanru to do it, Madame of Duke Xing deliberately publicized it outside so that she had to recognize her later. The ups and downs in it were like the plot of a story. Because Xiao Wanru was forced to leave Duke Xing's mansion and go to the nunnery to cultivate in seclusion after she recognized her ancestors and returned to her clan, it became more and more like a conspiracy. It turned out that Madame of Duke Xing had a plan for a long time. Thinking of the farce that the first Miss of Qin's mansion claimed to return to her family and impersonate, if she didn't have the approval of Duke Xing's mansion, how could she have the courage to do such a thing? What she said was indeed consistent with what had happened before. Initially, he only had 2 to 3 points of trust, but now, he had 50 to 60 points of trust. Qi Rongji was desperate this time. She was afraid that others would send her to Xing Nation Mansion again. She also knew that if she went back this time, she might never have a chance again. At this time, of course, she said whatever she wanted to say. Even if there was nothing, she had to do something to express her despair and sorrow. It was not easy for her to have such a chance to escape, and it could even be said to be the only chance. How could she give up? As she spoke, she cried and fell on the ground, looking extremely miserable. After listening to Qi Rongji's crying, everyone looked at each other and couldn't believe what they had heard. Madame of Duke Xing, who had always been dignified and decent in front of others, turned out to be such a person. Moreover, according to what she said, Madame of Duke Xing obviously had a conspiracy to recognize this Miss Qi, and this conspiracy was against the current 5th Miss Xiao. Qi Rongji just happened to meet her. Thinking about what Qi Rongji had said just now, not only did Madame of Duke Xing bully her, but also the Misses of Duke Xing's mansion were not good people. They usually beat and scolded her for various reasons. Even a servant girl could bully her at will. Although Qi Rongji was only the daughter of a local official, she could not be bullied by a servant girl. Several Misses of Duke Xing's mansion in the mansion also looked like Madame of Duke Xing. They were not good people, especially the first Miss Xiao, who was said to have the best reputation. She was the biological daughter of Madame of Duke Xing, and it was more likely that she was kind but vicious in heart. The so-called having both talent and beauty might be a joke. As for what had happened to Wang Xingxue, everyone felt even more contemptuous. Because of Duke Xing's mansion, many people knew what had happened to Wang Xingxue. He was originally a good child, but later he was stripped of his official title and had affairs with several women. He was very dirty. No family was willing to marry such a person. Unexpectedly, Madame of Duke Xing wanted to push someone else's daughter into such a difficult situation. It was really shocking. Although Qi Rongji was an adopted daughter and her parents were not in the family, it was possible for Madame of Duke Xing to help her get engaged. However, if others were not willing, she forced them and locked them up, which was really vicious. Qi Rongji's carriage had an accident on the street, and because she was afraid of being taken back to Duke Xing's mansion, she directly cried and complained on the street. For a time, there were a lot of onlookers. When Qi Rongji was taken away by Qi Tianyu, who came here after hearing the lecture, everyone still gathered around and talked about Qi Rongji. They all felt that Madame of Duke Xing was too vicious. Some people pitied Qi Rongji, some people hated Duke Xing's mansion, and some people doubted the so-called reputation of Duke Xing's mansion. Some people connected many things. After Madame of Duke Xing wanted to acknowledge 5th Miss Xiao but was refused, she did not give up and schemed against 5th Miss Xiao, forcing her to acknowledge Qi Rongji. Then, 5th Miss Xiao's adopted sister at that time pretended to be 5th Miss Xiao and planned to replace 5th Miss Xiao as the daughter of heir of Duke Xing. Then, a fire burned down, which was seen by half of the people in the capital city. The courtyard where 5th Miss Xiao lived was burned to ashes, and 5th Miss Xiao had to go up the mountain to Yuhui Nunnery to cultivate. Although it was quiet for a period of time, there were many incidents recently. Something happened in Yuhui Nunnery. Some people said that 5th Miss Xiao was a jinx, and it was said that even the imperial court was shocked. Someone tricked 5th Miss Xiao to go down the mountain and almost died at the foot of Yuhui Nunnery. There were many things. They didn't know it before, but when they thought about it, they were shocked. It was obvious that there were many conspiracies, and the target was 5th Miss Xiao, the daughter of the former heir of Duke Xing's mansion. Thinking about the complicated affairs of Duke Xing's mansion, heir of Duke Xing and Infanta Qinghua, who were supposed to inherit the eldest branch, were both dead outside. Was there any other reason? In fact, it was not only because of the war, but also because the second branch of Duke Xing's mansion wanted to seize this title. If it was really like this, the branch of the former heir of Duke Xing's mansion was really pitiful. Now there were only an orphan girl and a weak brother left, but those people still didn't let them go. They should mean to kill them. As for the reason why the little young master was fine, it was also because he had been raised in Rue, an great elder princess's mansion for the past 3 years. Otherwise, he would have been swallowed up with no bones left at this time. Some people also remembered that Master Hao had a very bad reputation in Duke Xing's mansion at that time. It was said that this posthumous young master was a devil. At that time, they thought that old madam especially doted on this little grandson because of her dead son, but now they felt terrified when they thought about it. It was not doting on the child. It was obvious that old madam wanted to ruin the child. On this day, the whole capital city was talking about Duke Xing's mansion, Madam of Duke Xing, and the Miss of Duke Xing's mansion. Most people came to the conclusion that there might be another reason for the death of the former heir of Duke Xing. He might have been killed by the current second branch. Now it was the second branch who benefited from it, and they were bent on killing the children of the eldest branch. This news came to Duke Xing's mansion with the ruler given by the Empress Dowager. Old Madam, who had just heard the rumors outside, and then saw the ruler and the women's precepts sent by the Empress Dowager, was so angry that her face turned blue and ferocious. She never expected that this matter not only made the Empress Dowager angry, but also made the whole capital city talk about Duke Xing's mansion. Has Duke come back? Taking a deep breath, Old Madam said coldly. Old Madam, don't worry. I have already asked someone to wait for Duke at the door. As soon as he comes back, he will come over immediately. Nanny Yu gently patted Old Madam's back to help her breathe slowly, for fear that she would be unable to breathe if she got angry. At this time, he is not at home. Where has he gone? Old Madam said impatiently, and she frowned so much that she could almost pick something up. Old Madam, don't worry. Duke must have something to do. Moreover, these things happened suddenly, and no one expected such a thing to happen. At present, things happened one after another, so Nanny Yu could only persuade her in this way. Old Madam, Duke is back. A servant girl panted in the corridor. Obviously, she ran to report. Quick, let him come in. Old Madam said in a hurry. She sat up straight and looked at the door eagerly. Too many things had happened today. At this time, Old Madam also felt mentally and physically exhausted, and she urgently needed her son to share the burden. The servant girl at the door lifted the curtain, and the chubby Duke Xing came in. There was a little anger on his usually smiling face, and his eyes were cold. After coming forward and bowing to Old Madam, he sat down in a chair on one side, and then his eyes fell on a jade box in front of Old Madam. This was the jade box that the Empress Dowager had just sent over. Mother, what is this? Today, your daughter-in-law scolded Wanru and her younger brother in the mansion, and they were heard by the people sent by the Empress Dowager and Prince Chen. Then they saw that the house your daughter-in-law bought for Xiao Wanru was full of shabby furniture, and they couldn't find a good one, which made me lose face. The Empress Dowager was angry and sent someone to send a ruler and a book of women's precepts to your daughter-in-law. Old Madam covered her head with her hands because of a headache, feeling very annoyed. Although she also had these speculations in her heart, she could only think about it in her heart. How could she shout it out like this? Even if the Empress Dowager's people did not hear it, it was not a good thing for others to hear it. Speaking of it, it was her own misconduct that caused such a big trouble. Thinking of the rumors outside, Old Madam felt very annoyed and felt very annoyed. Nanny Yu took a step forward and opened the box. As expected, there was a ruler made of white jade and a book of women's precepts. She opened them and put them in front of Duke Xing. There was a trace of fierceness on Duke Xing's chubby face. He fixed his eyes on the ruler in the box, slowly raised his head, and said as if he had made up his mind, Mother, let her go to the nunnery to cultivate in seclusion. Chapter 675. Remember in 1 second, 800 mail sign /say net. This is a wonderful free reading without a pop-up window. What? Old Madam raised her head in astonishment and stared at Duke Xing in surprise. She could hardly believe her ears. Mother, I think it's better to let her find a nunnery to meditate in seclusion. She can no longer manage the affairs of our mansion like this. Let sister-in-law take care of the affairs of the inner court. Mother, please guide her from the side. Duke Xing said coldly. This, how can you do this? She is the madam of Duke Xing whom you will marry officially. How can you be so heartless? Old madam said anxiously. Madam of Duke Xing had been raised by her since she was a child, and she had a special relationship with her. They were both mother-in-law and daughter-in-law, and also mother and daughter. How could she let her be driven to the nunnery like this? If he went to the nunnery to cultivate, he might not come out for the rest of his life. Mother, do you want the entire Duke Xing's mansion to be implicated by her? Mother, you should have heard the rumors outside. Now the whole capital city is talking about our Duke Xing's mansion. If you want to protect her, the whole Duke Xing's mansion will fall into the mud, and I can't have a foothold in the imperial court. No matter what happens, as long as others catch me at fault, I will have nothing to say. Duke Xing said coldly with a firm look in his eyes. No one had expected that this kind Duke Xing would be so decisive. Once he took action, he would make the final decision. But she is different. She gave birth to your children and did her best for you. Everything she did was for you. Even if you don't do it for her sake, you shouldn't do it for the sake of the two children. Old madam said in a trembling voice. Mother, I have been extremely benevolent to her. Everything in this mansion is decided by her. Even my concubines are under her control. Now that this matter has reached this point, it is her own fault. Although the Empress Dowager has only sent a ruler, if we handle it unreasonably, not only will the Empress Dowager not stand by, even the Emperor will not. Duke Xing stretched out his hand to rub his forehead and said. He was really upset. No one had expected that things would suddenly break out, and as soon as it broke out, it was in such an uncontrollable trend. If he didn't cut off his arm now, it would not be good, and he would be too ashamed to keep a foothold in the imperial court. He was naturally unwilling to leave the court just like that. His many years of planning could not be ruined because of this matter. But... Old madam still wanted to say something, but was interrupted by Duke Xing rudely. Mother, if I don't care about the two children, I will divorce her directly instead of asking her to cultivate in seclusion, lest she embarrasses our Duke Xing's mansion. Now I only ask her to cultivate in seclusion because I care about the two children. A son and a daughter. What he paid the most attention to now was not his son, but his daughter. This daughter had the potential to soar into the sky, and he could not allow her reputation to be ruined. Don't go to the nunnery to cultivate. You can cultivate in the ancestral hall. From now on, focus on cultivating in the ancestral hall. As you said, let your sister-in-law handle the affairs of the mansion. After all, old madam had experienced many hardships, so she gritted her teeth and agreed. Although the ancestral hall in the mansion was also used for quiet cultivation and was always locked inside, it was still in the mansion after all. Sometimes the children could always go and see their mother. Compared to being sent to an unknown nunnery, it was more than 1,000,000 times better. According to old madam's understanding of her second son, her son wanted to kill her. If she really got her out, she was afraid that she would die without knowing how. Old madam chose this second daughter-in-law herself, and she liked her the most. At first, she wanted her to be the eldest daughter-in-law, but later she became the second son's daughter-in-law by accident. Fortunately, she could become Madam of Duke Xing in the end, so her plan for her was not in vain. But in the current situation, she could do nothing. Mother, it may not be a blessing to stay. Duke Xing glanced at old madam and said coldly. You have to take care of the two children's wishes. Old madam frowned and refused to give in. Mother, since you think so, let her stay. From now on, let her cultivate in seclusion in the ancestral hall. As for the things outside, put them on her, so as not to ruin the reputation of Ru, and others. Duke Xing said decisively. He stood up and shook his sleeves. Mother, I'll go to see her. She has to admit it herself. It's not good to put these things on her. Old madam said in fear. Mother, who else do you think can bear these responsibilities? Ru, or you? Duke Xing looked at old madam coldly and asked. Old madam choked by this question. After a long while, she gritted her teeth and said, so be it. But she has to be willing to do it, otherwise she will make trouble again. Mother, don't worry. The children are also her own. Besides, she did all these things. Even if she wants to blame others, she can't. Duke Xing said coldly. After saying that, he turned around and strode to the ancestral hall. At the moment, this was the best way. At least he could suppress the harm of the matter to the minimum. However, the matters of the inner courtyard had nothing to do with him. There were some things that he did not want to be noticed by others, and he was more worried that someone would investigate them. Since it had passed, let it be. There was no need to find out and cause trouble again. The prosperity of Duke Xing's mansion could not be destroyed in the inner courtyard. In Duke Xing's opinion, Madame of Duke Xing's behavior was short-sighted. Xiao Wanru was a girl. Even if she was his brother's descendant, so what? Now the most important person to deal with was not a girl like Xiao Wanru. Seeing her second uncle, Duke Xing, Xiao Wanru stood at the entrance of the ancestral hall and stepped back to make way for him. Then she bowed sideways and said, Second uncle. Even though she lived in the mansion now, she had only seen this second uncle 2 or 3 times. However, it was easy to recognize him from his appearance and behavior. His chubby round face should look kind, but there was a hint of malice between his eyebrows just now. When he saw Xiao Wanru, he showed a smile and looked much kinder. Why are you here? Duke Xing asked in a gentle voice and looked at the ancestral hall on one side. At the entrance of the ancestral hall, candles were thrown out and smashed on the ground in a mess. At first glance, he knew that it was deliberately smashed by someone inside. His eyes involuntarily turned cold. I come to see second aunt. I want to ask second aunt, what did you mean by what you said before? Xiao Wanru said softly. She lowered her head so that her face could not be seen clearly, but the meaning in her words was elusive. Madame of Duke Xing was locked up in the ancestral hall because she said something wrong and said that Xiao Wanru and her brother were not the blood of heir of Duke Xing. Duke Xing sighed and comforted Xiao Wanru gently, what your second aunt said before is nonsense. She has always had a grudge against your mother and is jealous of your mother. She hasn't been able to get through your mother for so many years, but now she still treats you like this. It's my fault. I thought that she would deal with the affairs of the inner court fairly. Duke Xing sighed and comforted Xiao Wanru gently with a sad face. He looked at Xiao Wanru as if he was looking at his elder brother through Xiao Wanru. He said with a smile, you are really like your father. If my elder brother is here, he will be very happy to see a pair of children who are so similar to him. This was equivalent to admitting Xiao Wanru's identity in a disguised way and putting all the blame on Madame of Duke Xing. Xiao Wanru took a step back calmly and nodded softly. Thank you, second uncle. Since second uncle said so, I will go back first. Grandma is changing the furniture in my room. Go ahead. If you don't like it, you can tell second uncle or your third aunt. Your third aunt will be in charge of the affairs of the mansion in the future. Duke Xing nodded calmly. Xiao Wanru bowed sideways again and then left slowly. She narrowed her eyes slightly. She understood what he meant. Madame of Duke Xing had lost power and could not even manage the affairs of the inner courtyard. She should be locked up in the name of cultivating in seclusion. But she didn't know whether she should be locked up in the mansion or sent to another place. Miss, how did you guess that Duke would come here? After Xiao Wanru walked away, Yujia lowered her voice and said. Just now, they came here to provoke Madame of Duke Xing and make her throw out all the sundries in the ancestral hall. Since such a thing happened, someone has to be punished and someone has to take the blame. But the person has to be willing to take the blame. Xiao Wanru's long eyelashes fluttered twice and she said slowly with a serious face. Although it was just a short sentence, she could tell that her second uncle was not simple. It wasn't as amiable as he looked on the outside. He didn't say much, but he always spoke first, as if everything was in his hands. Xiao Wanru rarely felt this kind of feeling from others, except Chu Luqian. However, her second uncle seemed to be a little different from Chu Luqian, but she couldn't tell what the difference was for the moment. He took the lead, but he only suppressed her secretly. This method was a little too strict in the inner courtyard. If he directly used a thunderous method, she was afraid that she couldn't take it. Thinking of this, she couldn't help but secretly be vigilant. She had to be more careful in the future. "Miss, will Duke let Madam take the blame?" Yujia asked worriedly. "Of course he will. Who else can take the blame?" Xiao Wanru said with certainty. At present, except for Madam of Duke Xing, no one else could take the blame. For Duke Xing's mansion, although it was a serious loss to abandon Madam of Duke Xing, it was not a big deal after all. Their children were fine and they still had a future. However, it was not so easy for Duke Xing to let Madam of Duke Xing take the blame. She had angered Madam of Duke Xing in advance just now. She wanted to see how this second Madam of Duke Xing would be imprisoned. It depended on Madam of Duke Xing's ability. He hoped that the second Madam wouldn't let him down. He hoped that he wouldn't make this trip in vain. Whether she was willing to accept this matter or not, it also depended on whether she was willing or not. With the second Madam's temperament, how could she be willing to accept such things happening one after another, and now she had to bear all the responsibility for all of it. What was more, she had given her such a big gift. Chapter 676. Madam of Duke Xing was very angry, and her face was ferocious. Her beautiful face had already lost its former gentle color. Seeing Duke Xing come in, she stared at him coldly without saying a word, with vicious hatred in her eyes. Duke Xing didn't like this look very much. He frowned and said coldly, "Today's matter has been spread out, and the Empress Dowager has also given you a ruler and a female precept. There are also rumors outside that Qi Rongji was forced to marry Wang Xingxue by you, and now she has to escape from the marriage." "What do you mean, Duke?" Madam of Duke Xing raised her eyebrows and squinted at Duke Xing. "Since this matter is caused by you, of course you should share the responsibility. At this time, Ruer is going to enter the palace, so you can't let this kind of thing ruin Ruer's reputation. At that time, she can't even get the position of princess." Duke Xing said unhappily, with a trace of disgust flashing in his eyes. "Then what do you mean? Do you want me to take all the blame?" Madam of Duke Xing stood up from the chair, facing Duke Xing with an angry face, and clenched her hands tightly in front of her. If she hadn't been a little rational, she would have slapped Duke Xing in the face. "If you don't take the blame, do you want Ruer to take the blame? Besides, these things were originally your business. It was your idea to marry Qi Rongji. Now such a big thing has something to do with you. You talked nonsense in the mansion before, saying that Wanru and her brother are not the blood of my elder brother. What do you want to do? If you don't want to stay in this mansion, I can simply give you a divorce certificate." Duke Xing sneered, retreating in order to advance. Madam of Duke Xing's face became increasingly pale, and her lips trembled twice. Suddenly, she laughed and reached out to point at Duke Xing. "Have you had such an idea for a long time? Have you wanted to divorce me for a long time? It's a pity that I have been wholeheartedly serving you and taking charge of all the people in the mansion, but I didn't expect that I couldn't win your heart at all. Now when something happens, you want me to take the blame." With a gloomy face, Duke Xing looked at Madam of Duke Xing coldly, and suddenly sneered, "For me? Did I ask you to marry Qi Rongji, who has nothing to do with you? Did I ask you to make things difficult for my elder brother's daughter? All the wrongdoings were done by you. You were the one who was evil and couldn't tolerate others. You can't blame anyone. You brought this upon yourself. Made things difficult for me. Obviously, it was you." Madam of Duke Xing screamed. The next moment, she was slapped hard in the face, which only made her take 2 steps back and almost hit the table behind her. Fortunately, Nanny Shen was standing in this position and hurriedly reached out to help her. She hit the corner of the table, covered her stomach in pain, and bent down. "You'd better admit your crime. If something happens to Ru, because of you, you won't be able to absolve yourself from the guilt even if you die 100 times. As for other things, you'd better be careful with your words and actions, lest you don't know how you die. Ding Rousley, Ru Ling Tian. After saying that, Duke Xing left in a hurry in anger. He had thought that since things had come to this point, it was the best choice for Madame of Duke Xing to take on all the responsibilities. After all, it was for the whole Duke Xing's mansion, for her children, and because these things were done by herself, so she should do it. But he did not expect that Madame of Duke Xing would react so strongly. It seemed that she would not do it willingly. But even if she was unwilling, he could only deal with it in this way. Guard the ancestral hall. No one is allowed to visit Madame, and no one is allowed to come out. Standing at the door, he gave an order to the 2 rough old maids who had followed him here just now. The 2 rough old maids nodded and stood at the door of the ancestral hall. Duke, wait a minute. Nanny Xing rushed out and wanted to stop Duke Xing, but she was stopped by the 2 rough old maids at the door. Marquis, Marquis. Nanny Xing struggled desperately. Duke Xing stopped, turned to look at Nanny Xing, and gave an order with cold eyes. From now on, you will accompany Madame to live in the ancestral hall. Cultivate in seclusion, pray for the family, repent for the wrong she has done, and serve Madame well. After saying that, he turned around and strode away. Nanny Xing, who was behind him, was stunned for a moment and shouted again. But this time, Duke Xing did not look back. Nanny Xing fell to the ground and couldn't help crying. She was originally Duke Xing's wet nurse. When Madame of Duke Xing was raised in the mansion, she was very close to Madame of Duke Xing. Later, old Madame asked her to become Madame of Duke Xing's nanny. After Madame of Duke Xing married into Duke Xing's mansion, she was still Madame's closest nanny. Seeing that her second Madame had changed from an ordinary Madame to Madame of Duke Xing, and she had also become one of the most respected nannies in the whole mansion, Nanny Xing was very proud. But she had never thought that she would be locked up with her Madame one day. She was Duke Xing's wet nurse and Madame's trusted nanny. How could she end up like this? Seeing Duke Xing leave, Nanny Xing knew that there was no hope, so she could only turn around and walk back. When she walked inside, she saw Madame of Duke Xing sitting on the ground paralyzed. She hurriedly went forward to help her up and said, Madame, why did you sit on the ground? You will hurt your health. Hurt my health? Who cares about that? Madame of Duke Xing laughed wildly, picked up the rush cushion under her, and threw it hard against the wall on one side. Madame, you still have first miss and first young master. The whole mansion will be yours in the future. Nanny Xing comforted Madame of Duke Xing as she held her up. Madame of Duke Xing was everything to her now. If something happened to Madame of Duke Xing, she would definitely be in trouble. Only when Madame of Duke Xing recovered could she recover. The High Duke would not care about his feelings. Mine? Isn't there someone else outside? No wonder he has always been indifferent to me. No wonder I can't find him in the mansion on weekdays. It turns out that he has already had someone outside. Madame of Duke Xing gnashed her teeth and said. If Xiao Wanru hadn't whispered this matter to her servant girl when she came over just now, she really wouldn't have known that there was another woman besides the person she knew. She had worked hard for him in the mansion, but he had been flirting with another woman outside. Now it was all her fault that something had happened. If he hadn't secretly agreed, how could she have done such a thing? She felt hatred and anger in her heart. She was so angry that she had smashed things outside. Unexpectedly, it was Duke Xing who came in instead of Xiao Wanru. Madam, don't be angry. This kind of thing can't be true. The fifth miss must have deliberately said so to the servant girl in order to make you angry. You must not be angry. Nanny Xing tried to persuade her. Madame of Duke Xing's tears fell one by one and she said with hatred, if I hadn't helped him run the household affairs and tidy up everything in Duke Xing's mansion, he wouldn't have been able to be the current official with peace of mind. Now he doesn't need me anymore, so he pushed me out. No, I can't accept it. How could she be reconciled to this? She thought that after she got rid of that woman, she would be second only to one person in the backyard of Duke Xing's mansion. Unexpectedly, not only that woman haunted her, but also there were other women outside. "Madam, this. I'm afraid it's not true. It's a plot of the fifth miss." Seeing Madame of Duke Xing's face turn livid and pale, Nanny Xing hurriedly tried to persuade her. "I know it's true. It must be true." Madame of Duke Xing shook her head and said affirmatively. There were some things that she had been unable to explain and couldn't figure out why. She had thought that he treated her coldly because of that woman. Similarly, he was often absent from the mansion because of that woman. But in fact, not only his daughter, but also other women. In vain, she had thought that that woman was his weakness and a sadness that no one could touch. She had easily thought that she would not touch it. He didn't expect that the person in here had already changed. Some of the bits and pieces of the past, many things that he couldn't figure out, were all solved at this moment. It turned out that he had been looking in the wrong direction all along. It wasn't that woman, but another woman. That woman was real. Long before she married him, she had privately inquired about this matter. At that time, she had wholeheartedly wanted to marry the heir of Duke Xing. As for the matter of Duke Xing, who was still the second son of Duke Xing, she just laughed it off. It had nothing to do with her and she just wanted to watch the fun. Unexpectedly, there were evil consequences for what had happened at that time. Now that she thought about it, she found that she had missed such a big loophole. "Nanny Sheng, are you willing to accompany me in prison for the rest of your life?" Madame of Duke Xing gritted her teeth and said. The hatred in her eyes was as sharp as a knife, full of deep resentment. Nanny Xing shivered. Of course, she didn't want to do that. She also had a family. If she was imprisoned forever, she would be isolated from her family forever. Even if she could see them once or twice, how could she be as free and dignified as before? Madam, do you have any way?" Nanny Xing asked timidly. "Of course there is a way. That woman. I will ruin her reputation." Madame of Duke Xing glared at a certain place in the space with a fierce gaze, feeling the burning pain in her heart. This kind of hatred even exceeded her hatred for Xiao Wanru. All the plans she had made over the years ended up in vain for someone else. How could she be reconciled to this? No matter what, she was still Madame of Duke Xing now. Even if she was under supervision, she was still Madame of Duke Xing. She would definitely not let that woman live an easy life. "Go and inform Ruer to come to see me," Madame of Duke Xing said coldly. She wiped away the cold tears at the corners of her eyes with a gloomy face. It was indeed inappropriate for her to go out at this time, but it did not mean that others could not come in even if she did not go out. Even if two rough old maids stopped her at the door, it did not matter. Ruer would definitely find a way to come to see her. As the night fell, a maid carrying a lantern hurried to the ancestral hall with a figure in a cloak. Although the maid couldn't see clearly who the figure in the cloak was, she was Shuqi, Xiao Yanru's maid. Chapter 677. Miss, the first young master went to see Madam. When Qing came back to report, Xiao Wanru was still reading a medical book under the lamp. She put down the medical book in her hand and reached out to rub her forehead. Xiao Wanru asked with a little tiredness, "Did the first miss go there?" "The first miss didn't go there, but the first young master went there." The old maid guarding the door didn't dare to stop him, so she let him in. Qing saw it clearly. Although the servant girl following him was Shuqi, the person in the cloak was not the first Mississippi. She didn't see it clearly when she went in. Later, when she went out, although her back was in the shadow of the lamp, she still saw it face to face and saw it clearly. "Don't worry about him now. Ask someone to keep an eye on Duke Xing's whereabouts these days." Xiao Wanru raised the corners of her mouth, fluttered her long eyelashes twice, and said slowly. "Yes, miss. I'm leaving." Qing answered and left. Xiao Wanru picked up the scissors beside her and cut the dancing candlelight in front of her, and the smile in her eyes faded a lot. Xiao Wanru suddenly remembered that her second uncle had a mistress. In her last life, she had learned about it by chance. At that time, she was summoned by Xiao Yenru with an excuse, and then she was slapped twice for a trifle. When she knelt in the corridor, she heard two little palace maids talking about it secretly. They said that Xiao Yenru was angry in the hall because of it, and many palace maids were angry with her, so everyone should be careful. She didn't remember some things clearly in her last life, so she didn't think of it at first. However, after thinking of it inexplicably, she immediately had an idea and went to the ancestral hall. In fact, she didn't know what had happened, but it must be true. Otherwise, Xiao Yenru wouldn't have been so uncontrollable with her shrewdness. Since it was true, it was impossible for Madame of Duke Xing to bear this loss in silence when Duke Xing wanted Madame of Duke Xing to admit all these crimes at this critical moment, especially when Duke Xing wanted Madame of Duke Xing to admit all these crimes. She was not afraid that Madame of Duke Xing would investigate it. Since it was true, there would naturally be some clues, but Madame of Duke Xing didn't think of it at the moment. After she pointed it out for her, Madame of Duke Xing would definitely investigate it. In the last life, Xiao Wanru didn't know how this matter was dealt with later. As long as it was true, it would be easy to deal with it. It was a silent night. Early the next morning, Xiao Wanru asked for her resignation from old Madame, saying that she wanted to visit old Madame Qin. Old Madame Qin had raised and protected Xiao Wanru. Since she had gone down the mountain to cultivate in seclusion, although she could not attend too many banquets, she could visit her elders. This time, old Madame did not embarrass her and allowed her to go out without asking her to enter the room. The reason why the mansion was in such a mess now was Xiao Wanru. How could old Madame be in the mood to see her? She only felt that the more she looked at her, the more she disliked her. Xiao Wanru didn't seem to know that old Madame gave her the cold shoulder. She stood in the corridor and bowed to old Madame's main room before leaving slowly. Unexpectedly, she met the third Madame, Xiao Caihuan, and Xiao Kailing on the way. She stood aside and bowed to the third Madame when she came over. It was the first time that she saw the third Madame walk in front of others. It was said that the third Madame had been in poor health since she collided with Qin Yuru. At this time, the third Madame looked extremely pale and listless. After looking Xiao Wanru up and down, the third Madame turned around silently and left with her two daughters. "Miss," Yu Jie said. Xiao Wanru reached out to pull her sleeve, turned around and walked out with a calm look. "It's okay. Miss, you have no grudge against the third branch." "What do they mean?" Yu Jie took 2 steps forward, caught up with Xiao Wanru, and said angrily. The contempt in the eyes of the third Madame and the 2 misses could not be hidden. Her miss had nothing to do with the Madame and misses of the third branch. Why did they treat her with such contempt? They think that I am the root of everything, including the injury of the third Madame and the rumor that the miss of Duke Xing's mansion bullied Qi Rongji. Xiao Wanru's long eyelashes drooped slightly, leaving uneven shadows on her eyes. What does these things have to do with you, miss? One thing is about the first Miss Qin. If they want to take revenge, they should turn to the first Miss Qin. If they can't, they should turn to Madame of Duke Xing. It is obvious that she led the third Madame to get in the carriage at that time. How can they blame us? As for the matter about the first Miss Qi, it has nothing to do with you. Yu Jie became more and more indignant. She glared at a passing rockery with hatred, feeling that the whole Duke Xing's mansion was hostile to her miss and deliberately implicated her miss in all the things. When these things were connected, it was obvious that her miss was the most innocent one. Well, don't care about other people's affairs. Let's go. Let's go to see Nanny Dong later. Xiao Wanru said with a slight smile and didn't care much. Miss, you haven't been to the butterfly clothing shop for 3 years. You really should go and have a look. Nanny Dong runs the butterfly clothing shop very well. Every time I go there, I see a lot of people there. Yu Jie's eyes lit up and she smiled. Xiao Wanru had never gone down the mountain for so many years in the Yuhui nunnery, but Yujie had gone down the mountain and had been to the butterfly clothing shop several times, so she was much more familiar with everything about the butterfly clothing shop than Xiao Wanru. After getting a carriage from Duke Xing's mansion, Xiao Wanru came to the butterfly clothing shop with Yujie. When she got off the carriage and saw a lot of people coming and going in front of the butterfly clothing shop, she couldn't help showing a smile on her face. The butterfly clothing shop could be said to be her foundation after she came to the capital city and also her painstaking effort. Now it looked really good. Miss Nanny Dong got the news and came out to greet Xiao Wanru. She was very excited to see Xiao Wanru. Xiao Wanru shook her head gently at her, indicating that she didn't have to do this, and then followed Nanny Dong to the top floor with a smile. Nanny Dong also set up an accounting room upstairs. Sitting in the accounting room and looking at the bustling scene at the end of the street, Xiao Wanru felt as if she had fallen into the mortal world again. Sure enough, she had lived a quiet life on the mountain for too long, so long that she almost forgot how lively the mortal world should be. Yujie went to the window and lifted the curtain. Their position was higher than that of other shops around, so they were not afraid of being seen when they lifted the curtain. Miss, you come at the right time. The people from Fanglan embroidery shop will come over later. Do you want to meet them? Nanny Dong personally made a cup of tea for Xiao Wanru and suggested. They want to borrow money again. Xiao Wanru immediately understood what Nanny Dong meant. I think so. Nanny Dong nodded and said, when I borrowed money before, I checked their account books according to Mrs. Instructions. There is nothing wrong with their account books, and there is indeed something wrong with their funds. They just need to turn over the money a little, and they have paid back all the money they borrowed before. Xiao Wanru had asked Nanny Dong to keep an eye on Fanglan embroidery shop before, and Nanny Dong had been paying attention to it, especially when Fanglan embroidery shop borrowed money from them. She was very careful when checking the account books every time. Nanny Dong was so cautious that she didn't find anything wrong. She asked a trustworthy accountant to check the account books, and they all said that there was nothing wrong. It was just like an ordinary business. It was just that their capital chain was short for a moment. After this hurdle, they could start winning again. Have you copied them? Xiao Wanru slightly raised the corners of her mouth and smiled sweetly. Yes, I have. I have asked someone to copy the account books I saw. So far, they have copied them several times, but they are not the same account books. Maybe it is because there are too many accounts in and out of the account books. They will change the account books every 3 or 4 months, so they are not using the same account books. Nanny Dong thought for a while and said. This was the only thing she was confused about. The business of Fanglan embroidery shop was so good that it was unbelievable. Nanny Dong was also running her own business, and it was also good. But it was not as good as Fanglan embroidery shop, which only used one account book a year. Changing the account books every 3 or 4 months. Xiao Wanru pondered for a moment and asked repeatedly, with her watery eyes blinking twice. It should be a new account book every 3 to 4 months, or it could be changed every 3 to 4 months when the business is good, and a little longer when the business is normal. The reason why I guessed so is that there was a loan that was 4 months apart from the previous one, and the account book that was brought later was completely different from the previous one. It should be a new one, but the account book was done very well, and there was no mistake. Nanny Dong told the truth. Because the time between the 2 loans was a little short, and she had the habit of copying account books, after copying them, she looked through the previous account books and found that there was no difference at all. It could be seen that the account book had been changed. Except for that, Nanny Dong didn't find anything unusual. Are you here to see the supervisor of Fanglan embroidery shop? Xiao Wanru looked around. This was the accountant's room, but the accountant had been invited out. Yes, but there is another place where we can sit for a while. Nanny Dong immediately understood what Xiao Wanru meant. She pointed to a small screen at the corner of the room and said. After thinking for a while, she said, there is an accountant's room below. We can also go down there. The accountant's room below was bigger and easier to hide. There was not only a screen hanging in the corner of the room, but also a curtain. There was a bookcase with some old account books piled up in the bookcase. In fact, there was still a small distance between the bookcase and the screen. If a chair was placed there, people outside could not see it. Let's sit here. When we come, I'll sit there first. The people of Fanglan embroidery shop always borrow money. Is it really for turnover? How did they survive when we didn't help them before? Xiao Wanru's smile was still faint, but there was a trace of deepness in her eyes. Since she knew that the people of Fanglan embroidery shop wanted to do business with her, she had paid special attention to it. She knew about Fanglan embroidery shop because of Madame D. Coincidentally, this Fanglan embroidery shop was Madame D's dowry, and then it was given to Qin Yuru. It became Qin Yuru's dowry and then returned to Duke Yong's mansion. In the last life, Qin Yuru brought back some exquisite embroidery products from Fanglan embroidery shop several times. Most of them were sent to Duke Xing's mansion. Sometimes she would also send one or two to old Madame Qin. Every time this happened, old Madame Qin would call her over and secretly give them to her. When Fanglan embroidery shop came to the capital city this time, it was said that Duke Yong's mansion said that Madame D's dowry was at a loss. Not only had they taken care of Madame D for so many years, but they had also given a lot of money to Madame D and asked Madame D to return the money to Duke Yong's mansion. Now this embroidery shop seemed to be profitable. She really wanted to see what it meant. Chapter 678. A steward came from Fanglan embroidery shop. She was about 30 years old. She was very thin and looked a bit capable, but her smile was very friendly. When she saw Madame Dong coming out of the room, she immediately took 2 steps forward and greeted her with a smile. Madame Dong, you're so polite. I can come here by myself. We've been partners for many years. There's no need for this kind of courtesy. Steward Xiao, you're welcome. Please. Madame Dong smiled and led her into the room. When they got into the room, the two of them were seated according to the guest and the host. The little maid served tea and left. Madame Dong, I may have to trouble you again this time. Steward Xiao took out an account book with familiarity and sent it to Madame Dong. Look, this is our recent account book. In the past 3 years, Steward Xiao had come to borrow money more than once, and the two of them were also familiar with their respective procedures. In the past 3 years, Fanglan embroidery shop's credit was indeed good, and they had never failed to repay it. Sometimes they were a little late for a few days, but when they got the money, they would immediately pay it off. The two families were on good terms with each other. How much do you want to borrow this time? Madame Dong didn't take the account book. She frowned and said with some embarrassment. What's wrong? Can't Madame Dong get the money this time? Steward Zhao's heart skipped a beat. They were all smart people. Sometimes their eyelashes were empty. Although Madame Dong didn't say anything, it meant that something was wrong. I do have something to do recently. I'm afraid I can't get the money for a while. Madame Dong frowned more and more and said with a wry smile, Steward Xiao, if you come to borrow money, I will definitely lend it to you, but this time, what happened? Steward Xiao asked with concern. There are indeed some things. Steward Xiao, you also know that our boss is not a big shot in the government. It's inevitable that there will be some inconveniences. Madame Dong said implicitly. Are you embarrassed by someone in the government? Or did they confiscate the goods? Steward Xiao became more and more concerned and asked eagerly. Most of the difficulties in doing business were in these two aspects. In fact, it's not a big deal, but for my shop, it's really a big deal. My boss is now. It's a little difficult to continue for a while. Madame Dong sighed, reached out to rub her forehead, and sighed, it's just a woman's business. Why do you want to embezzle a woman's business? Even if it's a woman's business, to a merchant, it's fine as long as it's profitable. There's no need to care whether it's a woman's business or not. Manager Xiao explained with a smile. A woman's business was indeed less eye-catching than a restaurant or a hotel, especially a shop that had just arrived in the capital. It had an unstable foundation and was in urgent need of help. She had considered this reason when she chose Butterfly Clothing Shop. But he didn't expect that the supervisor of Butterfly Clothing Shop was so good at making money and had never done anything beyond her ability in the past 3 years. Now that something had happened, it was very beneficial to their family. I didn't earn much. It's really unexpected. Madame Dong sighed again and shook her head helplessly. It seemed that she was really tired. Steward Zhao's heart skipped a beat. She reached out to hold Madame Dong's hand and said very sincerely, Madame Dong, in the past 3 years, we've been getting along well. In the past 3 years, you've also helped us a lot. This time, let me help you. Tell me what's the matter. I've been in the capital for so many years, and I'm more familiar with people than you are. Madame Dong, I really want to help you. Although I don't know what kind of trouble you're in now, one more person means one more effort. Maybe I can help you solve this problem. Steward Zhao became more and more attentive. Well, if you can help us solve this matter, our Butterfly Clothing Shop will give you a generous gift. As for the cash flow problem of Fanglan Embroidery Shop, we will do our best to help you. Madame Dong was moved and promised. It's a small matter. Madame Dong, tell me what kind of trouble you've encountered. Steward Zhao waved her hand and said indifferently. This time, it's really not a small matter. A batch of materials and embroidery threads sent to the capital has been detained, saying that there's something wrong with them. Our Butterfly Clothing Shop is a serious business. How could there be such a thing? At present, this batch of things is very important. It's related to the orders of some big customers. If we don't make these orders as soon as possible, we will have to pay a lot of money. Our shop has only been in the capital for 3 years. If we lose a lot of money, we may not be able to establish a foothold in the capital. Madame Dong's face was full of sorrow, and her frown could almost kill a fly. Such a big thing had happened, and it was indeed not something that she, a steward, could handle. Your boss can't handle this matter? Steward Zhao tentatively asked. She was also very curious about the boss behind Madame Dong. It was said that she was an unmarried miss, but she didn't know which family she came from. It seemed that she was not a miss from a famous aristocratic family. Otherwise, it would be impossible for her not to handle this kind of thing. She had been with Butterfly Clothing Shop for almost 3 years, but she had never seen their mysterious boss. But thinking that she could be a miss before, she should be a madam in 3 years. It seemed that the madam's family was not a high-ranking official. It couldn't be Qin Yuru, because she didn't have enough confidence. At the beginning, this embroidery shop was said to be Madame D's dowry, but Madame D had never been in charge of it, so she followed Qin Huayong to Jiangzhou. Then it was on the list of Qin Yuru's dowry. But from beginning to end, this shop had been in the hands of Duke Yong's mansion and had never changed owners. Not only had it not changed owners, but they also wanted to get a sum of money from Qin's mansion as compensation. Whether it was profit or loss, it was all Duke Yong's mansion who had the final say. But this made Xiao Wanru have a new question. Originally, she just wanted to check the account of this shop, but she didn't expect that now she increasingly felt that things were not what she saw on the surface. There was obviously a big problem with this shop. If Duke Yong's mansion coveted Madame D's shops, why did they give them to Madame D as dowry at that time? If they didn't give them to Madame D as dowry, they would always be in the hands of Duke Yong's mansion. No matter what happened, whether they won or lost, it had nothing to do with others. What was the current situation? It was not just a matter of winning or losing. There was obviously something hidden in it. Everyone had seen the decline of Duke Yong's mansion. Even if they were from the business government, they might not be able to let them go. Where did Supervisor Xiao get the confidence to believe that this matter would be successful? The business yamen was indeed not a yamen with real power. It was not worth mentioning in terms of official power, but in terms of business, it was a highly respected yamen. Some descendants of aristocratic families would even practice in it, and even some descendants of the royal family would take part in it. How could Duke Yong's mansion be so confident? Xiao Wanru reached out and flipped through the account book on the table. The steward of Fanglan embroidery shop was indeed confident. She put the account book here. Before the matter was settled, she dared to do so. It could be seen that she was confident about the matter before, even before asking about it. Where did her confidence come from? One thing was certain. Duke Yong's mansion definitely did not have such confidence. Put the account book away. You can ask someone to copy it first. You don't have to worry about the business of the business government. Xiao Wanru stood up and told her again. Don't worry, Mississippi. I know. Madame Dong nodded in agreement. She had always been convinced of her master's ability. At such a young age, she could really gain a foothold in the capital city. Now her identity was even more extraordinary. How could Madame Dong not agree with her master? Seeing that Xiao Wanru wanted to leave, she hesitated for a moment and finally said, Miss, I have one more thing to report. Chapter 679. What's the matter? Xiao Wanru stopped and looked at Nanny Dong. Nanny Dong dodged her eyes and looked more hesitant. For a moment, she didn't know where to start. If Nanny Dong thinks of anything, you can directly send a message to Rui and Great Elder Princess's mansion. Xiao Wanru said with a smile and didn't ask further. Looking at Nanny Dong, she knew that she didn't want to say it now. Duke Xing's mansion was too complicated. She didn't want the people of Duke Xing's mansion to know that butterfly clothing shop belonged to her. It was much better to send a message to Rui and Great Elder Princess's mansion and then ask her grandma to send the message to her than to Duke Xing's mansion directly. Thank you, miss. Nanny Dong relaxed and bowed sideways to Xiao Wanru. Xiao Wanru nodded with a smile and left with Yujie. When they got in the carriage, Yujie asked, Miss, is there anything difficult for Nanny Dong? There should be. Xiao Wanru nodded and looked out of the window through the gauze curtain. She suddenly thought of something. She had seen a figure at the gate of butterfly clothing shop a long time ago. Was there something else? She didn't remember who it was at that time, but she suddenly remembered it these days. There was a little coldness in her watery eyes. If what she guessed was true, what she said just now had indeed helped Nanny Dong. Since this matter was related to her, she had to make preparations early. She trusted Nanny Dong, not only because they got along well with each other in this life, but also because she knew something in her last life. If what she guessed was true, it was no wonder that Nanny Dong could enter the imperial palace in her last life. How could a business girl enter the imperial palace? Someone must have recommended her repeatedly. In the past 3 years, she almost forgot about it. If it weren't for Nanny Dong's hesitant eyes just now, she really wouldn't have remembered it. Dong Xiu is married. Do you know which family she married? I don't know. I'll inquire about it next time. I only heard that it was an ordinary family with some official titles. I don't know the details. Yujie thought for a while and said. Miss had always paid attention to Nanny Dong and had never cared about Dong Xiu. She only knew that Dong Xiu had married a good man and seemed to be a scholar. She didn't know anything else. Go and check it out. Xiao Wanru narrowed her watery eyes and nodded. After going down the mountain this time, she had to straighten out some complicated things and eliminate some hidden dangers that she couldn't eliminate before. She was still young before, so it was inconvenient for her to deal with some things, but now it was the right time. Now, he had to bring up some old matters. Coming to Qin Manor today was the first step. The Qin residence was still in its original location, but it was much larger than the original place. It was said that the surrounding houses had also been merged. Qin Huayong was very trusted by the emperor. Although he was not promoted, this trust was not something that other officials could look down on. Therefore, the scale of the Qin residence had increased a lot. The carriage stopped at the gate of Qin's mansion. Someone had already gone in to report it. Hearing that Xiao Wanru had come, Shui Rulan came out to welcome her in person. Seeing Xiao Wanru get off the carriage, Shui Rulan's eyes turned red. Wanru. Aunt Shui. Xiao Wanru stepped forward and bowed deeply to Shui Rulan respectfully. Shui Rulan tried hard to suppress the bitterness in her nose and helped her up. Get up, get up. Then, he pulled her along and walked inside. Although the two of them were no longer mother and daughter, their affection for each other had not dissipated. When Xiao Wanru went to the Yuhui nunnery that day, Shui Rulan and old Madame Qin would go to the Yuhui nunnery to visit her from time to time. They still treated her the same as when they were in Qin's mansion. How is Grandma? Xiao Wanru asked as she walked in. Good, good, it's not a big deal. Mingqiu Nun prescribed me a few more doses of medicine before, and I'm a little stronger than before. Shui Rulan nodded repeatedly. Seeing that Xiao Wanru's face was still a little pale, she felt sad. Xiao Wanru's face had always been rosy and bright, but now it looked a little pale. It was obvious that she had not lived a good life in Duke Xing's mansion. Thinking of this, she felt sad. If it were not for the fact that Duke Xing's mansion insisted on recognizing Xiao Wanru, she would have preferred to raise Xiao Wanru herself. Xiao Wanru's eyelashes fluttered twice and she smiled sweetly. Although her face was a little pale, her lips were still red without any makeup, which made her delicate face as white as jade look breathtakingly beautiful. When she didn't smile, her beauty would seem cold, but when she smiled, it was like 100 flowers blooming, extremely charming. How is Aunt Shui? Where's Brother Xian? Xiao Wanru asked with a smile. I'm in good health. I'm fine. Brother Xian is very naughty. He's at my mother's place now. Shui Rulan answered one by one with a smile. Qin Xian, nicknamed Brother Xian, was born by Shui Rulan before. He had come to visit Xiao Wanru with Shui Rulan and old Madame Qin before, so he was no stranger to him. Now he was almost 3 years old. When they arrived at old Madame Qin's place, they saw a chubby child rushing over and directly throwing himself into Xiao Wanru's arms. Sister! Sister! He was so excited that he thought it was really his sister. Since Brother Xian was born, he had been very close to Xiao Wanru. There were no other sisters in the mansion. Since Qin Yuru married into Duke Yong's mansion, she seldom went home. Even when she came back, she looked at Brother Xian with a gloomy and terrible look. So Shui Rulan did not dare to let Brother Xian get close to her. However, Xiao Wanru seemed to get along well with Brother Xian. Every time Brother Xian saw Xiao Wanru, he treated her as his biological sister and was very affectionate. Xiao Wanru managed to catch Brother Xian with great difficulty. His little body was quite strong. If it weren't for Yu Jie who held her by her side, she would have been knocked down to the ground. Brother Xian, do you miss me? Xiao Wanru hugged the little fatty with a smile and asked. I miss my sister very much. Brother Xian wants to see my sister, but Grandma won't let me. She says Brother Xian is not obedient. Brother Xian is very obedient. I can eat by myself and study. Brother Xian straightened his back and proudly raised his chubby little face. Brother Xian has been enlightened, but his study is a little messy. Shui Rulan said with a smile, reached out to pull the little fatty over and let Xiao Wanru stand up. Grandma. Xiao Wanru took 2 steps forward and bowed to old Madame Qin. Although old Madame Qin was thin, she looked in good spirits, which made Xiao Wanru feel relieved. I'm fine. Zhuozhua, sit down and talk. Madame Dowager reached out to pull Xiao Wanru to sit next to her. In fact, she also missed Xiao Wanru very much, but it was not convenient for her to go to Duke Xing's mansion all the time. Seeing Xiao Wanru come to see her, she was naturally happy. Although this child was raised under Madame D's name at the beginning, she was actually brought up by old Madame Qin. How could old Madame Qin not feel distressed when she saw the little girl grow into such an adult and become someone else's child? However, no matter how distressed she was not her own child after all. Moreover, in such a situation, it should be a good thing for her to leave Qin's mansion. Old Madame Qin did not expect that Duke Xing's mansion would treat Zhuozhuo like this. How could there be such a cruel person? Zhuozhuo was still their own child. How could they treat Zhuozhuo so slowly and even plot against her early? 3 years ago, before Zhuozhuo returned to the family, Zhuozhuo was just a child. How could they treat a child like this and plot against her early? How could old Madame Qin not despise the whole Madame of Duke Xing? There were rumors everywhere outside. Even if old Madame Qin didn't go out, she also knew these rumors, and finally connected all the things. Madame of Duke Xing obviously knew something long ago and deliberately used Qin Yuru and Madame D to harm Zhuozhuo. If they succeeded, Zhuozhuo would probably be doomed eternally. As long as she thought of this, old Madame Qin couldn't swallow her anger and felt suffocated. Zhuozhuo, your Aunt Shui and I will always be your family. Old Madame Qin patted Xiao Wanru's hand gently and said lovingly. She was really afraid that Xiao Wanru would be sad. Although this child had been smart since she was a child, she really didn't have many relatives. How bitter she felt to be treated like this by her own blood relatives. Grandma, don't worry. I will be fine. Xiao Wanru said with a smile. She knew what old Madame Qin meant and comforted her. She didn't care about the people of Duke Xing's mansion at all. When this blood kinship became a plot and vicious plot, in fact, it had long lost its original binding force. That's good. If there is anything, you can come to me and your Aunt Shui. Even if I do my best, I will help you. Old Madame Qin said. Shui Rulan sat down beside her with the little fatty brother Xian in her arms and said with a smile, it's inconvenient for you to deal with something. Aunt Shui will help you. She had now secured the position of the general's madam, so she said this with confidence. Yes, I will help my sister. Brother Xian will also help my sister. Brother Xian jumped a few times to show his support for his mother. His pink little fat face was very cute. Brother Xian and Qin Yuru didn't look like each other. It could even be said that they didn't look alike at all. Maybe it was because they looked more like their respective mothers. Brother Xian was very delicate and handsome, and Qin Yuru's beauty was also inherited from Madame D. But if one looked closely, one could still see the similarity between Brother Xian and Qin Huayong from his face. At this time, he jumped and looked very cute. However, the little fatty was so heavy that Shui Rulan almost couldn't hold him, so she could only put him on the ground helplessly. He immediately jumped in front of Xiao Wanru, pulled Xiao Wanru's sleeve, looked up at Xiao Wanru, and said sincerely, Sister, I will definitely help you. Such a silly and cute look of a little adult made everyone present laugh. Okay, Brother Xian will help you in the future. Xiao Wanru also smiled and reached out to pat Brother Xian's little head. After getting his sister's affirmation, Brother Xian became more and more complacent and raised his little face proudly. Everyone laughed again. Xiao Wanru asked something about Brother Xian. Knowing that he had been enlightened now, she asked something about his studies, and then changed the topic, Grandma, how is Madame D? Chapter 680. Madame D is still the same. She has been locked up all the time and no one goes to see her. Only people from Duke Yong's mansion come to visit her, but Yuru doesn't come often. At the mention of Madame D, the smile on old Madame Qin's face faded. Xiao Wanru understood the meaning of old Madame Qin's words. Madame D was really nothing in the Qin's mansion and could no longer pose a threat to Shui Rulan. However, Duke Yong's mansion still sent people here, which meant that they still attached importance to Madame D. So the Qin's mansion could not treat her too harshly and just locked her up. As for the other necessities, they should not be lacking. As for Qin Yuru, with her temperament, it was impossible to expect her to be grateful to her birth mother. Grandma, can I see Madame D? After thinking for a while, Xiao Wanru finally raised her watery eyes and asked softly. You want to see Madame D? Old Madame Qin frowned and didn't understand why Xiao Wanru wanted to see Madame D at this time. Grandma, I want to ask her if she knows anything about the past. I think she is the most suitable person to ask. Xiao Wanru said bluntly. She had a hunch that Madame D knew a lot about her background, much more than old Madame Qin. Okay, but be careful. Mrs. Qin nodded. She ordered someone to take Xiao Wanru there. Shui Rulin had intended to accompany Xiao Wanru there, but Xiao Wanru refused. The old maid led Xiao Wanru to Madame D's courtyard. Two burly old maids were guarding at the door. When they saw Xiao Wanru, they were stunned for a moment and hurried forward to salute. The original second miss of Duke Xing's mansion was now the fifth miss of Duke Xing's mansion. Most of the servants in the mansion knew her. Is Madame D resting? Xiao Wanru raised her hand and motioned for them to dispense with the formalities. I don't think so. I just saw Madame D walking out for a while. An old maid answered. Xiao Wanru nodded and stepped into the yard. It had been almost 3 years since she had set foot here. Now she looked at it again. Everything seemed to be the same as before, but in fact, it had changed. Second miss. An excited voice came from the side. Xiao Wanru looked sideways and saw a maid in plain clothes standing in the corridor, looking at Xiao Wanru excitedly. She looked to be in her 20s. A maid in her 20s. Why is it so big? Miss, it's Qing Shui. Yu Jie reminded Xiao Wanru. Second miss, it's really you. I kowtow to you. In the corridor, Qing Shui had put down the tray in her hand and rushed over with tears. She walked up to Xiao Wanru, knelt down with a plop and kowtowed heavily to Xiao Wanru. You're Qing Shui. Xiao Wanru looked at her face and asked hesitantly. In her memory, Qing Shui was young and beautiful. Was the old maid in front of her, who looked almost old, really Qing Shui? Second miss, I'm Qing Shui, Qing Shui cried. Xiao Wanru looked at Yu Jie, who hurriedly stepped forward to help her up. Qing Shui, what happened to you? Xiao Wanru looked her up and down. After a closer look, she was indeed Qing Shui, but she looked old and haggard. She should have been less than 20 years old, but she looked like she was in her 20s. I'm serving Madame D. Qing Shui lowered her head and wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. Xiao Wanru understood. Since Qing Shui could serve Madame D for so long, she must have suffered a lot. With Madame D's temperament, she must have tortured the people around her fiercely when she was locked in such a desperate situation. She continued to walk inside. Before she reached the door of the main room, the curtain was lifted, and an old nanny came out. When she saw Xiao Wanru, she opened her mouth wide in shock and couldn't say a word. This was Nanny Zhou, who was much older. She looked at least a dozen years old. Second miss. Nanny Zhou murmured. Is Madame D here? Xiao Wanru raised her eyes and asked lightly. Yes. Nanny Zhou hurriedly said. Another maid came to lift the curtain. They were Madame D's first two principal maids, Maya and Meibao. The two of them didn't look like they were in their prime. They both looked old and lifeless. Everyone in the courtyard seemed to have aged a lot. It was as if the 3 years in the outside world had overlapped several times, as if several 3 years had passed. Xiao Wanru walked inside. Who's here? A dry and hoarse voice came from inside, with an extremely uncomfortable feeling, as if something had been sharpened on a heavy whetstone. Xiao Wanru stepped in and saw Madame D sitting in the chair in the middle. Madame D was very skinny, so skinny that she looked like a bag of bones. Although her clothes were gorgeous, they did not fit her at all. Her eyes were so big that they almost popped out of their sockets, which was inexplicably horrifying. She did not look beautiful at all. Because she was too thin, her lips were protruding, her cheekbones were high, and her eyes were turbid. She couldn't be compared with the high-spirited Madame D who had just moved to the capital city 3 years ago. She looked like Madame D's mother 3 years ago. You are Qin Wanru? Madame D looked at Xiao Wanru fiercely. Obviously, she had recognized who she was. Her eyes were vicious and gloomy, as if she wanted to kill someone. After saying that, she picked up the teacup on the table and smashed it hard at Xiao Wanru. The hot tea had just been brewed. Nanny Zhou was so scared that she screamed and her face immediately turned pale. Xiao Wanru's status was not what it used to be. If she was really smashed and scalded, Madame D would definitely be in trouble. Yu Jie quickly pulled Xiao Wanru to avoid the teacup. The teacup hit the door of the room heavily, and the curtain, which had been a little dirty, looked even more dirty. It's Xiao Wanru. The fifth Miss of Duke Xing's mansion, the daughter of the former heir of Duke Xing and Infanta Qinghua, and her maternal grandmother is Rui, a great elder princess. After Xiao Wanru stood still, she looked at Madame D calmly and said with cold eyes. So what? She is just an unfavored girl. Do you really think that Duke Xing's mansion really wants you to go back and be a legitimate miss? Madame D sneered in a hoarse voice, with a trace of madness flashing in her eyes. She had schemed to let her daughter take Xiao Wanru's place. Unexpectedly, she failed on the verge of success and Yuru fell into that position. How could she not hate Xiao Wanru when she thought of this? She couldn't wait to bite Xiao Wanru to death, eat her flesh bit by bit, and avenge her daughter. All of this belonged to you, If it weren't for Xiao Wanru, you, would have been fine. Whether I am favored or not, I am the miss of Duke Xing's mansion. Neither you nor Duke Yong's mansion can control me. I heard that the first Miss Qin has been locked up by Duke Yong's mansion recently, just like you. Could it be that she will be locked up forever like you? The heir of Duke Yong's mansion may have to marry a co-wife. Xiao Wanru said calmly with a happy expression. She even shook her sleeves and accidentally splashed a few drops of water on them. You're talking nonsense. Madame D screamed. Her eyes were red and cloudy. You know whether I am talking nonsense or not. How long has it been since the first Miss Qin came to see you recently? If she hadn't been locked up, do you think she wouldn't have come to see you? Xiao Wanru still said leisurely, as if she didn't find that Madame D was driven crazy by her. Qin Yuru did not come to see Madame D for a long time. Madame D was living a hard life now. She almost counted the days and looked forward to Qin Yuru coming to see her every time. However, Qin Yuru didn't come. She did wait for a long time and had a lot of guesses. However, at the thought that it was her mother's mansion, she felt that it would be fine. Nonsense, nonsense. You, will be fine. Absolutely nothing will happen to her. Madame D screamed crazily. Her voice sounded as if she was going to break her throat. Even so, her voice was not high, but it was full of an uncomfortable feeling. Her throat must have been injured in the past, so that it had not fully recovered until now. You should know whether I am talking nonsense or not. Madame D, it should be your retribution that you were hurt by your own daughter. You wholeheartedly helped Qin Yuru to hurt me, but in the end, you were abandoned by your own daughter and almost died in her hands. It should be a good feeling. Xiao Wanru's tone became more and more calm, but the meaning of her words made Madame D tremble all over and almost lose control. She pulled the railing of the chair with her fingers convulsively and shivered all over. Nonsense, nonsense. Her sharp voice almost hurt everyone's ears in the room. You know whether I am talking nonsense or not. Your daughter is so vicious, and now she is going to be despised by Child D. She will soon follow your old path and have to be confined in the backyard. Madame D, this is also your own sin. You want to pretend to be my father's daughter? It's a pity that you didn't succeed, but let Madame of Duke Xing take advantage of you. Xiao Wanru sighed softly this time with a trace of smile flashing in her eyes, but her eyes were cold. After saying that, she turned around and was about to leave, as if she didn't want to talk to Madame D anymore. She took advantage of me. Madame D grabbed the railing of the chair with her knuckles turning white, which showed that she had exerted a lot of strength. Of course. Madame of Duke Xing always gets what she wants in Duke Xing's mansion. Madame D should know what kind of person she is, right? I heard that Madame of Duke Xing put all the blame on the first Miss Qin, and it was Qi Rongji who testified. First Miss Qin is really doomed this time," Xiao Wanru said. After saying that, she turned around and left without talking to Madame D, as if she came here this time to see Madame D's miserable appearance. With the hatred between her and Madame D, it was normal for her to do so. "Miss, please save me." Qing Shui knelt down at the door with a plop and begged Xiao Wanru. In fact, not only her, but several people who stayed in the yard with Madame D were almost driven crazy by Madame D and wanted to leave. Even Nanny Zhou also wanted to leave. It was said that she would also leave after making some arrangements. Xiao Wanru glanced at Qing Shui calmly and didn't ask Yu Jie to help her up this time. "I will tell Aunt Shui about your matter. You can be transferred to another yard, but you can't completely ignore this place." Qing Shui understood and was immediately overjoyed. She kowtowed to Xiao Wanru hard and said, "Thank you, Mississippi. Thank you. Even if I am transferred to another yard, I will continue to serve Madame D." Chapter 681. Qing Shui was forced to come back to serve Madame D at the beginning, and she was willing to work for Xiao Wanru secretly. However, things happened one after another. The biggest change was that Xiao Wanru became the miss of Duke Xing's mansion, and then she went to the Yuhui nunnery to cultivate in seclusion and no longer intervened in the affairs of Qin's mansion. Madame D was also seriously injured at that time, and she might not even survive. Xiao Wanru didn't expect that she would torture the people around her so viciously. Xiao Wanru didn't expect that Madame D still tortured all the people around her. Needless to say, Duke Yong's mansion was behind this. Duke Yong's mansion seemed to be declining and inconspicuous, but it seemed to be everywhere. The interests of Qin's mansion and Duke Yong's mansion had always been closely linked. After so many things, they could still get along like this. The meaning behind this was thought-provoking. Although Qin Yuru was Madame D's biological daughter and the only granddaughter of old Madame of Duke Yong's mansion, she attached too much importance to this granddaughter, even more than to her own grandson. Was this really a normal phenomenon? It was said that the heir of Duke Yong's mansion had abandoned himself to despair. Almost as soon as he had time, he would go out to indulge in debauchery and did not even come back at night. He was a playboy, a good-for-nothing playboy. In the last life, although Di Yan was also a playboy, at least he didn't sound hopeless. With the background of Duke Yong's mansion, Ningyuan Army General's mansion and Duke Xing's mansion, he still steadily embarked on an official career and got along well with Qin Yuru outside. But now, everything had changed, and he was no longer the same as before. Duke Yong's mansion attached so much importance to Qin Yuru. Was it really what they saw on the surface? In addition, with Madame D and Qin Yuru's dowry, she always felt that there was something wrong. This time, she came to find out. She wanted to see what trump card Madame D had not shown. This trump card was the final answer to Qin Yuru's protection, and this trump card must be amazing. Qin Yuru had lost her reputation to such an extent, but Duke Yong's mansion still tried to protect her. Xiao Wanru didn't believe that Duke Yong's mansion would be so benevolent. The so-called family would actually dissipate after being worn out step by step. Madame D had a secret. After Qin Yuru survived the fight with Duke Xing's mansion, this conjecture became confirmed. However, this secret was disadvantageous to Shui Rulin and old Madame Qin. Madame D knew this secret. Since Duke Yong's mansion could keep an eye on Qin Yuru and not use her as a shield, it could also be used to deal with Shui Rulin and her grandmother. She would never allow such a thing to happen. There must be a secret. If she couldn't force it out this time, Xiao Wanru would think in another direction. Not long after she left Madame D's Yulan pavilion, she saw Qin Huayong's servant hurrying over. When he saw Xiao Wanru, he hurriedly saluted and said, "Fifth Miss Xiao, our general invites you." "Ningyuan Army General is in the mansion?" Xiao Wanru asked in surprise. In the past, Qin Huayong was not in the mansion at this time and was working in the yamen. The general heard that the fifth young lady is coming, so he specially stayed in the mansion, the servant said with a smile. Xiao Wanru followed the servant to Qin Huayong's study without hesitation. After about 3 years, she went to Qin Huayong's study again and felt inexplicably touched. Since she recognized Qin Huayong as her relative in Duke Xing's mansion that day, she had never had a chance to talk with Qin Huayong in private, nor had she said a word to him. It was very quiet in the study. When Xiao Wanru entered the door, she saw Qin Huayong sitting behind the large desk without picking up the file to read. He frowned tightly and lowered his head as if he was thinking about something. Hearing Xiao Wanru's voice, he raised his head and looked at Xiao Wanru with a trace of excitement in his eyes. He supported himself with his hands and seemed to want to stand up, but finally calmed down. "Uncle." Xiao Wanru stepped forward and bowed respectfully, bowing deeply. Since they were comrades, it was reasonable for her to call him uncle. "Wanru, sit down and talk." Qin Huayong tried his best to calm down and said slowly. Previously, she had called him father, and now she was calling him uncle. It couldn't be said that this form of address was wrong, but it inexplicably made one's heart feel strange. There was a kind of indescribable sadness. Even if he didn't care about it, she was still the daughter that he had raised for more than 10 years. He had watched her grow from a little girl to a beautiful young lady of an aristocratic family. Moreover, she wasn't even from his family. This feeling was really unbearable. "Yes, uncle." Xiao Wanru said obediently and sat down in a chair on one side. The study became quiet, and it seemed that no one knew what to say next. Finally, Qin Huayong coughed and his eyes fell on Xiao Wanru's face. Her childish face had grown up, and her delicate little face was extremely beautiful. Her long black eyelashes fluttered twice on her eyelids, and then she raised her head. Her eyes were as clear as glass, her skin was snow-white, and her lips were not red. Her appearance was much better than Qin Yuru's. In the past, Qin Yuru was also beautiful. Otherwise, she would not have such a great reputation in Jiangzhou. 3 years ago, Qin Yuru was as beautiful as a blooming flower. Xiao Wanru was still young, but even so, everyone could see her beauty. 3 years later, Qin Yuru was thin and frail, and no longer looked like a girl who was in love. Xiao Wanru, however, was as beautiful as a fairy coming out of the most beautiful ink painting. It was said that the first miss of Duke Xing's mansion was also extremely beautiful. Compared with his mansion, the daughter of Duke Xing's mansion was not only noble but also beautiful. "Wanru, how are you doing in Duke Xing's mansion?" Qin Huayong asked softly. "Thank you for your concern, uncle. I'm doing well." Xiao Wanru replied softly with a smile. If you need any help, you can ask me, ask your Aunt Shui for help. I will definitely help you if I can." Qin Huayong coughed again. "Thank you, uncle." Xiao Wanru said. "You left some things here in the past. Go and have a look later. If you find something you like, move it over. It's useless to leave them in the mansion." Qin Huayong said again. He didn't expect what happened at that time. Later, Xiao Wanru only asked someone to move a small part of her things. If Zhifang Pavilion was also empty, there were still many things that Xiao Wanru used at that time. "Thank you, father. I know. I'll go and have a look later." Xiao Wanru responded gently to Qin Huayong's words. It was just that this response was mostly polite. It seemed that the two of them were just familiar strangers. They were familiar because they had lived together for so many years, but they were not familiar because there seemed to be a lot of things between them. Some things were gone and it was difficult to find them again. Even if it was the former family affection. However, the family affection, which had been controlled by prejudice and calculation, was no longer the original meaning. The two of them tried their best to speak in a gentle manner, but they always felt that something was missing. They didn't talk as freely as they used to. After a few words, Xiao Wanru said goodbye and went out, saying that she wanted to go to the original courtyard to have a look. Qin Huayong didn't stop her and nodded with a smile. Seeing that she bowed to him respectfully and retreated, his eyes slowly became cold. Looking at Xiao Wanru's back, he let out a heavy sigh. Now he didn't know how to face his former little daughter, and his heart was full of mixed feelings. After Xiao Wanru left for a while, he suppressed his thoughts and ordered the servant, "Go and invite the first young master of the Qi family here." The servant answered and left. After a while, he invited Qi Tianyu, who was waiting in the flower hall outside, in. After the greeting, they took their seats according to the host and the guest. "First young master of the Qi family, why do you come to see me today?" Qin Huayong went straight to the point. In the past 3 years, Qi Tianyu rarely appeared in the Qin's mansion. At this time, he suddenly came here at the time when Xiao Wanru passed through the mansion, which was really not a pleasant thing. "Uncle, I do come here for something. In fact, I want to meet Xiao Yanru." Qi Tianyu didn't hesitate and said bluntly, "About my sister, the only one who can speak in Duke Xing's mansion and is willing to speak for my sister is 5th Miss Xiao, so I have to trouble you, uncle." Qi Rongji's matter also made the whole Duke Xing's mansion lose face. Not only did Madame of Duke Xing get a reputation of being sinister and vicious, but also the masters of Duke Xing's mansion got a reputation of being duplicitous and evil. It was really not the behavior of a miss from an aristocratic family to bully a adopted daughter. In particular, Qi Rongji even rolled up her sleeves in excitement, and the scars on her arms could be seen. It was said that they were accidentally injured by the masters of Duke Xing's mansion. Accidentally? How could it be really accidentally? She was not a child, and there were so many servant girls and old maids following her. A miss from an aristocratic family actually had so many scars on her arms. It could be seen that Duke Xing's mansion really trampled on others and didn't take other people's daughters seriously. Even though she was a miss from an aristocratic family in a small place, she had been pampered and raised by her parents. If they didn't like her, they could refuse to recognize her as their adopted daughter, and they didn't force her to do so. At that time, they even used Qi Rongji as a shield. Once the shield's function was over, they actually mistreated her and even ruined her marriage to such an unworthy person. It was really too much. "It has nothing to do with Wanru," Qin Huayong said in a deep voice. All the masters of Duke Xing's mansion had the possibility to mistreat Qi Rongji, but Xiao Wanru didn't, because she was not in Duke Xing's mansion and had a good reputation. "Of course it has nothing to do with 5th Miss Xiao, but my sister's current situation also has something to do with her bad reputation. My sister is not young, and she has done such a thing and fallen out with Duke Xing's mansion. In the future, her marriage." Qi Tianyu sighed heavily, then stood up again and bowed deeply to Qin Huayong. "Uncle, I hope you can give me a chance to meet 5th Miss Xiao and ask her to help me reconcile. I can't let my sister be alone for the rest of her life." This seemed to be reasonable, but Qin Huayong didn't agree directly. His eyes fell on Qi Tianyu's face and he began to examine him. Did Qi Tianyu really mean this? Chapter 682. "Uncle, if you are worried, you can ask the servant to follow me. I just need to have a few words with 5th Miss Xiao," Qi Tianyu said politely. Since he had said so, for the sake of Magistrate Qin Huayong could not refuse, so he could only nod and ask the servant to lead Qi Tianyu to see Xiao Wanru. After that, he sat in the study alone in silence for a long time. When did these things go wrong? Now he couldn't grasp the direction, and sometimes he even doubted whether he did the right thing or not. He was a general who had fought on the battlefield, so he had always been determined. When he decided on something, he would choose a direction early and rush in a certain direction. But now he was a little confused. Xiao Wanru returned to Jifang Courtyard, which she had not seen for a long time. Everything in Jifang Courtyard had remained the same. There were not many people in Qin's mansion before, and now there were even fewer. After Qin Yuru got married, Qin Wanru returned to her family. Brother Xian, who had just been born, was too young to live in a separate courtyard. There were only a few masters in the mansion, so there were several vacant courtyards. No one lived in Xiao Wanru's courtyard. Besides, Xiao Wanru cherished old friendships, so it had been kept the same. There were fewer servant girls and old maids in the courtyard, but they were all old acquaintances. Seeing Xiao Wanru coming over, they hurriedly stepped forward and bowed respectfully. Everyone knew that their second miss was the daughter of heir of Duke Xing and Infanta Qinghua, who had royal blood. Because of this, no one dared to offend her, even though she was no longer the master of Qin's mansion. She walked into the main room and sat down. After a servant girl served tea, she left obediently, leaving Yujie to serve her. At this time, there was no need for other servant girls and old maids to serve her. Xiao Wanru just wanted to sit here. Things remained the same, but people had changed. At that time, she was still the second miss of Qin's mansion, but now she had changed her surname. After picking up the teacup and taking a sip slowly, Xiao Wanru stood up and looked at a flower rack by the window. There were some of her things on it, many of which were brought by her from Jiangzhou. She reached out to pick up an inkstone. The carved pattern on it looked extremely elegant, a little ancient, but also a little simple. In fact, when she was in Jiangzhou, she and Qi Baiyu went out to look for it. It was rare for them to find such a good piece of inkstone, but they almost got into a fight. Thinking of it now, she felt it was very funny. His hand landed on a brush washer. This brush washer still had a hole in it. It looked a little damaged, but there was also a story behind it. There were many things on the flower rack. Thinking of them now, she missed them very much. Before Qin Yuru plotted against her marriage, although she was not favored in Qin's mansion and was bullied by Qin Yuru and Qi Rongji, she was protected by old Madame Qin after all. Moreover, they did not have much interest in her, so Madame D and Qin Yuru did not kill her. After that, Madame D and Qin Yuru repeatedly tried to kill him for their own interests. In the last life, they finally succeeded. With a nostalgic smile in her eyes, she became bloodthirsty. She took a scroll of painting from the painting jar on one side, and then slowly unfolded it. There were a few pieces of calligraphy, which were written by herself. She spread them on the desk and suddenly became interested. She asked Yujie to help her grind the ink, took a piece of white paper, and wrote according to the words on it. After writing a word, she carefully identified it. After all, it had been 3 years, and her handwriting was very different from before. In the past 3 years, she had copied a lot of scriptures in the Yuhui nunnery and practiced a lot of handwriting. Her handwriting was no longer as immature as it used to be. She put down the brush in her hand, picked up the previous piece of calligraphy, and gently rubbed it with her fingers. She raised her hand and looked at the trace on her hand in astonishment. It was very shallow and almost invisible. If she had not touched it with her fingers, she would not have found this little dust. Why was there only such a light dust on it? The servants cleaned up the room. Every place was indeed clean, but they didn't clean up things like her calligraphy and paintings. The servants basically didn't clean up these things, and it was very likely that they would damage them in the cleaning. Therefore, they didn't let them clean up these calligraphy and paintings. Even if they cleaned them, they just cleaned them carefully and dusted them off. The words she had written herself were not considered precious. She had just left them there casually without putting a bag over them. As a result, after 3 years of rolling them up, they would inevitably accumulate dust inside. Even if someone were to carefully flip them over from time to time, there would still be a lot of dust inside. The mark of the dust on her hand was very light, so light that it could hardly be seen without careful observation. If she didn't know clearly that this piece of calligraphy had been written for 3 years, she would really think that it had been written for only about a month, and the degree of dust accumulation on it was at most a month. She rolled up this piece of calligraphy and put it aside. She took another piece of calligraphy and reached out to touch it after looking at it. It was also very light. She picked up another piece of calligraphy. This was a painting. She pressed her hand on it, and immediately there was a thick layer of dust on her fingers. There was another piece of calligraphy, and the mark was very light. There were a lot of calligraphy and paintings in the painting jar, which were all casually painted by Xiao Wanru when she was in the Qin's mansion in the past. There were calligraphy and paintings, which seemed to be traces of 3 years. There was a lot of dust, but the calligraphy was different, as if someone had seen it recently and carefully. The dust on it didn't seem to be accumulated for 3 years. After reading all of them, Xiao Wanru's eyes became deep and she glanced at the 2 rows of calligraphy and paintings on the table. The calligraphy was placed in a row, and the painting was placed in a row. It was not so obvious when they were mixed together before, but now after they were divided into 2 rows, she immediately found that the calligraphy and painting were indeed different. Since the outside had been dusted, the dust on the painting was not very obvious. In fact, it was rarely cleaned here. However, the calligraphy was different. Her calligraphy was basically very clean, and even from the appearance, it could be seen that something was wrong. Her handwriting was not very good. It was all casually written by herself and could not be considered as a treasure. In fact, because of the foundation of her previous life, her paintings had always been much better than her handwriting. But now, her paintings were very normal, but her handwriting had been touched. "Miss, is there something in your calligraphy?" Yujie also noticed something at this time and couldn't help reminding her. "I don't know either." Xiao Wanru shook her head. She really didn't know the reason why someone was interested in her words. Although her calligraphy was not ugly, it was not the work of a famous artist. Moreover, she was just a girl in the boudoir. Who would notice her? The surrounding scene was the same as when she left 3 years ago. There was no trace that it had been touched. If she hadn't pulled out the calligraphy in the painting jar, she wouldn't have found the reason. Therefore, this person should be familiar with everything here and know some of her habits. But this person carefully avoided everything that made her suspicious. Did he guess that she would come back and didn't want her to find anything? There were many mysteries in her mind, as if there was something deeply hidden there and within reach, but she couldn't see it clearly for some reason. She sat in the chair and took out a piece of calligraphy to read. This piece of calligraphy was written by her. It was very ordinary and there was nothing suspicious, but this piece of calligraphy was also wiped very clean. "Miss, could it be that heir of Duke Xing left something for you and Madam of Duke Xing knew it, so she sent someone to check the old things here?" Yujie blinked her eyes and had a whimsical idea. Xiao Wanru shook her head and said, "It can't be Madam of Duke Xing." Many clues here showed that this person was not an outsider. This person knew everything here. Moreover, even after she left, there were still servant girls and old maids left in her courtyard. Not everyone could come in at will. In the daytime, it was not easy for people from other mansions to enter the mansion, let alone enter the backyard. Moreover, there happened to be no one in the yard. If it was at night, who would come over? Who could come over? She always felt that there was a key point about the Qin's mansion that she didn't think of, so that many things involved couldn't be explained, or even if they could be explained, it seemed very far-fetched. Was someone looking for some calligraphy? Her own calligraphy? Something suddenly flashed through her mind. "Miss, the first young master of the Qi family asks to see you." While she was thinking, she suddenly heard a servant girl outside the door reporting. She had just arrived at the Qin's mansion, and Qi Tianyu came. Xiao Wanru unconsciously frowned. After motioning for Yujie to put the calligraphy and painting away, she stood up and went out to greet him. Even though she didn't live here now, it used to be her boudoir. She was unwilling to meet Qi Tianyu here because she was not so familiar with him. In the yard, Qi Tianyu stood there with his hands clasped behind his back. With a little sadness on his handsome face, he stood at the gate of the yard very politely and did not directly enter the room. There was a servant standing beside him, who was a servant of the Qin's mansion. He should be a servant of Qin Huayong. It seemed that Qin Huayong had agreed to let Qi Tianyu come here, which made her feel inexplicably uncomfortable. Hearing the voice behind him, Qi Tianyu turned his head and looked at Xiao Wanru, who was walking down the steps, with a trace of inexplicable sadness in his eyes. "Fifth Miss Xiao." Before Xiao Wanru bowed, Qi Tianyu had already bowed deeply. Xiao Wanru stood a few steps away, looked at Qi Tianyu indifferently, bowed sideways, and then said in a businesslike manner, "What's the matter, Your Excellency Qi? If you have something to do, you should go to Duke Xing's mansion. The matter of the first Miss Qi has nothing to do with me." I don't know what kind of life she has been living in Duke Xing's mansion. Such an excuse, and distancing herself from Qi Tianyu looked extremely ruthless, especially her bright and shimmering eyes, which were like a cold lake with ripples but no warmth. She looked at Qi Tianyu without any politeness and euphemism. This was what Qi Tianyu wanted to say, but Xiao Wanru said it. Even Qi Tianyu, who had always been wise, sometimes couldn't speak at this time. After a long while, he smiled helplessly and said, "Fifth Miss Xiao, do you bear a grudge against me? If so, I'm here to apologize to you, and I'm willing to clear up your doubts and ask for your forgiveness." Chapter 683. Forgive. You must be joking, Your Excellency. My miss has been framed by you all the time and almost lost her reputation several times. How can you forgive her? Standing behind Xiao Wanru, Yu Jie glared at Qi Tianyu angrily and said. She disliked Qi Tianyu and Qi Rongji very much. Both of them were not good people. Yu Jie. Xiao Wanru scolded Yu Jie in a low voice. Although Yu Jie was not convinced, she still shut her mouth angrily and stared at Qi Tianyu vigilantly, for fear that he would do something bad again. In Yu Jie's mind, Qi Tianyu was a cunning wolf. No one knew when he would show his fangs. Fifth Miss, do you think so of me? Qi Tianyu looked at Xiao Wanru with a wry smile and asked softly, as if he did not hear Yu Jie's evil words. The girl in front of him was no longer the childish and cute little girl 3 years ago. Xiao Wanru, who had grown up, had left Qin Yuru far behind. If she were still in Jiangzhou now, she would be the most beautiful girl in Jiangzhou. Even in the capital city, compared with the first miss of Duke Xing, who was the most beautiful girl, everyone would think that she was the real most beautiful girl. Xiao Yanru was inferior to her. Does it make any difference whether I think so or not? Your Excellency, do you come here today to frame me again? I have made it clear to the first young master of the Qi family a long time ago that you'd better stay away from me. Xiao Wanru said expressionlessly. Fifth Miss, please save Rongji. There was a trace of anger on Qi Tianyu's face. It could be seen that he suppressed it and said slowly. Your Excellency, you are really interesting. What does Miss Qi's matter have to do with me? Did I ask her to recognize her relatives or lock her up? What does the matter of Duke Xing's mansion have to do with me? In what name do I stand up for Miss Qi? What kind of reason do you use to speak? When you were in Jiangzhou, you were a talented man. I didn't expect that you became naive after coming to the capital city. Xiao Wanru sneered rudely. Yu Jie stared at Qi Tianyu fiercely. Qi Tianyu's face turned red, green, pale, and then red with anger. You and Rongji grew up together. Besides, Duke Xing's mansion is also your mansion. Now that Rongji is in trouble, it's okay for you to say something for her, right? Help Qi Rongji. Why? Based on the fact that she has repeatedly harmed me in the past, or the fact that you have spared no effort to take my life in the past? Sir Qi, if I repay evil with good, how can I repay good? The smile on Xiao Wanru's face became colder. She glanced at Qi Tianyu's face with some contempt and said, Your Excellency, you are not the only smart person in the world. I hope this is the last time. Otherwise, even if you are an official now, I will never spare you. After that, Xiao Wanru turned back and left Qi Tianyu in the yard. Yu Jie, who was walking behind Xiao Wanru, glared at Qi Tianyu with a little anger, snorted coldly and entered the room. The curtain fell, blocking the view from the inside and outside of the room. Qi Tianyu was so angry that his face turned livid. If he hadn't been in the capital city for 3 years and had been involved in official affairs for a while, he would have lost control long ago. He glared coldly at the curtain, his eyes cold and sinister. Young Master Qi, let's go back. Seeing that the situation was not good, the servant hurriedly reminded him. As a servant of Qin's mansion, he naturally had to make plans for Qin's mansion. He couldn't let young Master Qi really quarrel with Fifth Miss in his mansion. He had seen clearly their attitudes just now. It was obvious that they were like fire and water, and it was impossible for them to compromise. Although the servant was from the capital city, he had learned part of what happened in Jiangzhou from the servants he brought from Jiangzhou. He knew the past of young Master Qi, first Miss and second Mississippi. The servant felt strange. Why did young Master Qi think that fifth Miss Xiao would help him now? Thinking of how they treated fifth Miss Xiao at that time, it was good enough that she didn't hit him when he was down. How could he ask fifth Miss Xiao for help? Considering the grudge between them, how could it be possible? Qi Tianyu glared at the curtain with hatred. After a long while, he turned around and said, "Let's go." After saying that, he turned around and walked out, and the servant hurriedly followed him. "Miss, let's go." Yu Jie, who was behind the curtain, had been paying attention to Qi Tianyu in the yard. Although she knew that Qi Tianyu would not lose his mind, it was understandable if the former first young master of the Qi family really did something stupid after being provoked by her Mississippi. So she had to be careful. It's just a pretense. Of course, he will leave. Xiao Wanru sat leisurely in front of the table and said with a happy look, which was completely different from her cold look in the yard just now. Why on earth did he come here? Yu Jie said in confusion. She turned around, walked to the window, and opened it a little for her. There should be a deep meaning. He always pesters me like this, as if he wants to get something from me, but I can't have any good impression of him at all. Qi Tianyu knows this, but he still pesters me. He must have other intentions. He wants to get something from Miss. In fact, Yu Jie didn't figure out what Qi Tianyu wanted, but she was sure that what he wanted must be the same as her Mississippi. When you haven't returned to the family, he has been interested in you, and he has been interested in you since. Isn't it because of Duke Xing's mansion? Yu Jie said in a low voice, as if she was talking to herself. It's also possible that he has guessed my identity long ago. Xiao Wanru said with deep eyes. It seemed that only she, the person involved, was not very clear about it, while others knew a lot. No wonder she died so miserably in the last life. Many people knew it, but she didn't know it. She had been blinded by others. But this time, she was ahead of others, so she could be one step faster, and one step faster. Nanny Zhou sneaked out of the courtyard and avoided the two old maids guarding the door. In fact, it was not that they didn't see her, but that they turned a blind eye to her because they were bribed by silver. No matter what Madame D did, people from Duke Yong's mansion came to visit her from time to time. For this reason, people in the mansion didn't dare to be completely rude to her. Moreover, the general would send gifts to her during the spring festival. Even if Madame D couldn't come out, thinking that she would become the first miss of Duke Yong's mansion, no one dared to really offend Madame D. She would pretend not to see it if she could. Everyone was smart. Qing Shui watched Nanny Zhou leave, and then watched her go to a remote courtyard. She said a few words to an ordinary old maid, stuffed something into the old maid's mouth, and then left. Now she was no longer Madame D's servant. Since she was released from the confinement with Madame D, her status had been degraded. Now she was a second-class servant girl. But this degraded status of servant girl was much better than being imprisoned with Madame D and being abused to death. When she came out of the courtyard with her small parcel, Qing Shui felt alive again. The days when she served Madame D were the darkest days of her life. She knew what she was going to do next, so she stared at this place after nightfall. Then she saw Nanny Zhou go out, followed her out, and saw Nanny Zhou send something into the hands of an ordinary old maid. She didn't know this old maid. Nanny Zhou sneaked back again. Qing Shui thought for a while and didn't go back. She stared at this old maid. Seeing the old maid pack up everything, she smiled and went to the door of the back courtyard with a parcel. In fact, it was still early. Even if there were servants who wanted to go back, it was not the right time. Seeing the old maid coming over, the old maid guarding the back door greeted her with a smile. The two seemed to be very familiar with each other. After teasing each other for a while, the old maid went out with her parcel. Then the old maid guarding the door closed the back door again. It seemed that she was going to lock the door and leave. Qing Shui was very anxious. She looked around and didn't see anyone else. After thinking for a while, she turned back. When she reached the next intersection, she turned back again and ran to the back door. When she arrived at the back door, she almost couldn't breathe. She held the small tree beside the door, gasped loudly, and wiped the sweat on her face with one hand. "You are." The old maid at the back door looked her up and down and didn't recognize her for a moment. When Qing Shui followed Xiao Wanru, she was not important. She basically stayed in the courtyard and was rarely sent out. After that, she followed Madame D and was locked up soon. There were not many people in the mansion who knew her, so it was normal that the old maid at the back door didn't recognize her. Just now. Qing Shui said while gasping. Because she was so anxious, she couldn't even speak and could only gasp. "It's Nanny Zhou just now." "What's wrong?" Seeing that she was gasping heavily, the old maid guarding the door hurriedly continued her words. It seemed that she couldn't breathe and couldn't even speak properly. "Yes, it's Nanny Zhou, she went out." Qing Shui coughed as if she was choking. "Don't worry. Take your time. Didn't Nanny Zhou go out specially? What's the fuss? She used to go out at this time. What's wrong with that?" The old maid guarding the door really felt that Qing Shui was exhausted. It was such a big deal, but she couldn't even finish her words. Qing Shui shook her hand hard, indicating that she didn't mean that, and then said, "Nanny Zhou went out, the parcel." "What's wrong with the parcel? Did you take the wrong one?" "No, it's the same parcel in the past." The old maid guarding the door became more and more confused. She looked at Qing Shui with a puzzled face and didn't understand what Qing Shui meant. You didn't take the wrong one." Qing Shui seemed to have finally recovered and said a complete sentence. "Of course I didn't take the wrong one. I've always seen this parcel with red flowers on a blue background. It's easy to recognize." The old maid looked at Qing Shui up and down. She still didn't recognize which yard Qing Shui was from. "I made a mistake. I thought it was a new parcel from the kitchen." Qing Shui smiled embarrassedly and wiped her sweat again. Then she bowed to the old maid guarding the door with humility and said, "Nanny, I'm really sorry to bother you." "It's okay. Nanny Zhou is a member of the gardener's family in the mansion. When the gardener is busy, she will come to help for a few days. She comes early in the morning and goes back after finishing her work. She is a smart person and won't make a mistake." The old maid guarding the door was very fond of Qing Shui's politeness and specially took care of her. Chapter 684. Remember in 1 second, 800 mail sign small/say net. This is a wonderful free reading without a pop-up window. The gardener in our manor is an outsider. Shouldn't he be a servant in the mansion? Qing Shui did not understand the situation here. Now that she had found an excuse to talk about it, she naturally asked with a smile and a curious expression. When he was in Jiangzhou, the gardeners in the general's mansion were all servants of his mansion. He used to be a servant in the mansion, but since Duke Yang's mansion sent a few precious flowers, he had to hire a skilled gardener from outside. The old maid guarding the door happened to be bored, so she didn't think Qing Shui was annoying and explained to her in detail. "Why did Duke Yang's mansion send flowers to our mansion?" Qing Shui's eyes widened. "You girl, don't tell me you just entered the mansion. I haven't heard of anyone entering the manor recently." The old maid guarding the door was confused by her ignorance and looked at Qing Shui in astonishment. She really didn't know Qing Shui. "I've been in the mansion for a long time. Maybe I haven't been to the back door." Qing Shui smiled vaguely. "Originally, the flower books of Duke Yang's mansion were not sent to our mansion. When first Miss returned to the mansion, she said that the flowers and trees in the mansion were too simple and not special, so she specially sent a few books to our mansion. She didn't say that she would send them to our mansion, but only told us to take good care of them and that they would be of great use in the future." The old maid did not notice Qing Shui's abnormality, so she continued to introduce. "Moreover, This matter was not a secret in the general's mansion, so there was no harm in revealing it. What great use does it have? I really don't know. Who knows what First Miss is thinking? First Miss is now the wife of the heir of Duke Yong. It's not up to us servants to decide what we want to do. The old maid yawned and said, Thank you, mammy. Qing Shui knew that the old maid was tired of her, so she took the opportunity to bow and leave. Xiao Wanru's carriage was stopped as soon as it left the Qin's mansion. Fifth Miss Xiao, what a coincidence to meet you here. Chu Liuxin poked his head out of the carriage with a face full of surprise and excitement. Just by looking at the carriage, he knew it was his own carriage. Xiao Wanru frowned. She didn't think it was such a coincidence. The carriage had the logo of Duke Xing's mansion, but not all carriages with the logo of Duke Xing's mansion belonged to her, not to mention that she just came out of Qin's mansion. He glanced at Yujia and said softly, Prince Chen's mansion. Yujia understood. He leaned out of the carriage and said to Chu Liuxin with a smile, What a coincidence. I actually met Prince Xian. Are you also going to Prince Chen's mansion? Why are we going to third brother's mansion? Chu Liuxin, who was smiling, was stunned. He did not understand what Yujia meant. The Empress Dowager and Prince Chen have both rewarded our miss before, and old madam also wants to thank Prince Chen for the gift. Today, she specially asked our miss to bring a gift. I didn't expect to meet Prince Xian here. How about asking Prince Xian to do us a favor and bring the gift to old madam? Yujia said with a smile. She reached out to pick up a gift box from the pile of gifts given by old Madam Qin and Shui Rulan and jumped out of the carriage. Thank you, Your Highness. She handed over the exquisite gift box in her hand. Chu Liuxin's smile froze on his face. It was not easy for him to wait for Xiao Wanru to go out. He wanted to meet her by chance and then chat with her in the tea house on the side or walk on the street. Anyway, this time Chu Liuxin planned to stay with Xiao Wanru until she went back to the mansion. Since it's a gift from old madam to third brother, it's better for fifth Miss Xiao to send it in person. Chu Liuxin said dryly. In fact, it's not reasonable for old madam to ask our miss to send a gift. Although Miss saved Prince Chen before and Prince Chen thanked her for it, there is a difference between a man and a woman after all. Yujia said seriously and then bowed deeply to Chu Liuxin. I hope Your Highness can help our Mississippi. Our miss will never forget it. Chu Liuxin's eyes fell on the carriage in front of him. The curtain fell, but he could not see the figure of the beauty inside. He sighed helplessly and asked the little eunuch beside him to take the gift box from Yujia's hand. He said weakly, Then I'll go there on behalf of your miss. Thank you, Your Highness. Yujia bowed again with a smile, then turned back to the carriage and got on her own carriage. The coachman looked at Prince Xian and waited for the carriage of Prince Xian's mansion to leave before he could move forward. Chu Liuxin waved his hand helplessly, and the carriage of Prince Xian's mansion got out of the way. Watching the carriage of Duke Xing's mansion leave, Chu Liuxin looked at the carriage slowly passing by him. Not only did the curtain move, but there was also no movement on the window. The person inside was not interested in him at all. This kind of feeling was really bad. Chu Liuxin's head drooped, and he was in no mood, like a frosted eggplant. Your Highness, in fact, fifth Miss Xiao still trusts you very much. You see, she thinks of you at this time. Eunuch Lu rolled his eyes and tried to comfort his master. How do you know that fifth Miss Xiao trusts me? Chu Liuxin went to his carriage dejectedly. Your Highness, didn't you hear it? It seems that old Madam of Duke Xing's mansion really hopes that Prince Chen and fifth Miss can be together. Otherwise, she would not have asked fifth Miss to go to Prince Chen's mansion alone regardless of the etiquette between men and women. But fifth Miss is not willing, so when she saw you, she asked you to help her take the gift. Eunuch Lu was very good at talking and made Chu Liuxin happy in a few words. When he thought about it carefully, it seemed that it was true. He immediately cheered up and nodded repeatedly. What you said makes sense. That's the reason. Your Highness, think about it. Fifth Miss Xiao is not willing to follow old madam's order to see Prince Chen, but she is willing to entrust the gift to you. It can be seen that you and Prince Chen are different in Fifth Miss Xiao's heart. Seeing his master happy, Eunuch Lu became more and more flattering. Chu Liuxin was very happy after hearing these words. He touched his smooth chin and nodded repeatedly. That was the reason. It was indeed the reason. It seemed that he not only had to perform well in front of Fifth Miss Xiao, but also in front of old Madam of Duke Xing's mansion, so that she could see him, lest old Madam wanted to marry third brother and Fifth Miss Xiao. Obviously, he and Fifth Miss Xiao were more compatible. Thinking of this, he did not refuse to help Xiao Wanru send the gift box at all. He got into the carriage happily and went to Prince Chen's mansion with Eunuch Lu. Xiao Wanru didn't expect that she was afraid that Chu Liuxin would stir up trouble on the street, so she deliberately asked Yu Jie to pester him endlessly. Unexpectedly, Eunuch Lu made such a deep and sincere explanation. Chu Liuxin's carriage entered the side door of Prince Chen's mansion. When he got out of the carriage, he personally came down from the carriage with the gift box in his arms. Then he smiled and said to Xiao Xuanzi, who came to lead the way, "Is third brother in the mansion?" He just came back from the Empress Dowager's palace. He happens to be in the mansion now, but he just took the medicine and took a rest. Xiao Xuanzi was in a dilemma, but he still told the truth. Taking a rest? Forget it. I won't see third brother. Give this gift box to third brother and tell him that it is a gift from Duke Xing's mansion that he rewarded Fifth Miss Xiao before. I hope third brother can accept it. Chu Liuxin rolled his eyes and thought that if he went back at this time and took a shortcut, he might be able to block Xiao Wanru. He immediately handed over the gift box in his hand and prepared to give it to Xiao Xuanzi. It was rare for him to have such an opportunity, so he really didn't want to give it up. If he blocked the beauty again, he would not leave this time no matter what. No matter what Fifth Miss Xiao was going to do, he would follow her and accompany her. Your Highness Prince Xian, I can't do this. It's not easy for you to come here. If I let you go back like this, my master will definitely not spare me when he wakes up. Your Highness, please. I'll tell my master right away that you're here. Xiao Xuanzi took a step back with a smile, stretched out his hand, and made way for him. This meant that he had to go in once. Xiao Xuanzi was very smart. As soon as he heard this, he knew that there was a reason, and it was related to Fifth Miss Xiao, so he couldn't leave. Chu Liuxin wanted to refuse very much, but when he saw Xiao Xuanzi's enthusiastic performance and looked at his eunuch Lu, who also winked at him to go in, he could only follow him in. When he arrived at his third brother's mansion, it would be unreasonable if he didn't go to have a look. In the past, he would come to have a look when he had nothing to do. Moreover, his mother had repeatedly told him to get on good terms with his third brother. Let's go. Chu Liuxin said unhappily, but he had to pretend to be happy. He raised his eyebrows very high, which looked a little ridiculous. Xiao Xuanzi tried hard to look at the ground under his feet, for fear that he couldn't suppress his laughter. He inexplicably felt that Prince Xian was also unlucky. How could he run into his master's trap at this time? Chu Liuxin followed Xiao Xuanzi to a hall and sat down in a chair. A maid had already come to serve tea. It was a maid who was as beautiful as jade, which made people's eyes light up. Your Highness, please wait here for a moment. I'll be back soon. Xiao Xuanzi smiled and asked the maid to put a fruit bowl and snacks before he said to Chu Liuxin. Chu Liuxin waved his hand and said impatiently, Go and come back as soon as possible. It would be best if he could see Chu Luchen and say a few words to him before leaving immediately. Xiao Xuanzi answered with a smile and left. When he walked to the door, he looked back at the beautiful servant girl standing in the hall, and his smile became more cheerful. He turned around and went to the inner court to find his master. Chu Liuxin picked up the tea at hand and took a few sips. The tea was good. After putting it down, he looked around and found that it was a flower hall that he had never seen before. It was not big but exquisite, and the decoration inside was very elegant. After looking around, her gaze landed on the servant girl standing beside her. She couldn't help but smack her lips in wonder. Third brother's residence actually had such a beautiful servant girl. She was much more beautiful than the maids in his mansion. Even Chu Liuxin, who was used to seeing beautiful palace maids in the palace, had to admire her. This maid could be considered as beautiful as a flower. Sensing that Chu Liuxin was observing her, the beautiful maid raised her head shyly and glanced at him with a blush. Then she stepped forward and refilled the teacup that he had just taken a sip of. However, perhaps because she was too shy, her hand trembled and the tea overflowed and then dripped down from the table. Chu Liuxin hurriedly stood up, but it was too late. A few drops of tea had already dripped on his robe. Chapter 685. Remember in 1 second, 800 mail sign small/say net, Your Highness, please forgive me. Your Highness, please spare me. The servant girl knelt in front of Chu Liuxin with a plop and kowtowed to him with the hem of his robe. All right, it's nothing serious. Chu Liuxin's clothes were pulled, but he could not move away. He felt really uncomfortable. He looked at the servant girl's beautiful face and saw that she was pale with fear. Her whole body was trembling. He felt sorry for her and said to Eunuch Lu helplessly, Eunuch Lu, pull her away. Eunuch Lu came over and pulled the servant girl who was kneeling on the ground. The servant girl was even more afraid and did not let go of the hem of Chu Liuxin's clothes. Stop pulling. Chu Liuxin was almost pulled down. Seeing that the current situation was really not good, he could not help but stop Eunuch Lu. Eunuch Lu had to retreat. Let go. I won't blame you. Chu Liuxin said gently to the servant girl. He thought to himself that his third brother was so fierce to his servants that he was so scared after making such a small mistake. Your Highness, help me, help me. The servant girl cried and was delicate and pitiful. She tightly pulled the hem of Chu Liuxin's clothes, as if she was pulling her only life-saving straw. Even if Chu Liuxin had no other way, he could not help but be very soft-hearted at this time. The beautiful girl was looking at him expectantly. How could he really push her away? However, it was really improper to keep holding her like this. Let go of me first. I'll help you explain to my third brother later. If he must blame you, I'll simply ask for you, so that you won't be so afraid. Chu Liuxin said helplessly. Thank you, Your Highness, thank you. The servant girl kowtowed 3 times, so hard that Chu Liuxin felt pain on his forehead. This girl really didn't slip. She was an honest girl. He had a good impression of her, especially when he saw her white and tender forehead immediately become red and swollen. He bent down and reached out to pull her up. Get up. I'll go and tell my third brother later. It seemed that his third brother was too strict in management. It was really pitiful to see a servant girl so scared. What did you say to me? Chu Liuxin's cold voice suddenly came from the door. Chu Liuxin turned to look at the door and saw Chu Liuxin walking in slowly with Xiao Xuanzi. From Chu Liuxin's angle, he saw that Chu Liuxin slightly looked down at the kneeling servant girl. The servant girl's hand was still holding Chu Liuxin's. Sensing that her hand was trembling, Chu Liuxin moved forward and happened to be in front of the servant girl. Third brother, this maid is pretty good. How about giving her to me? Chu Liuxin said with a flattering smile. Judging from Chu Liuxin's appearance, he didn't seem to be easy to talk to. In the past, he didn't have much to say in front of Chu Liuxin. At this time, he simply asked for the servant girl so that she wouldn't be punished. You want this servant girl? Chu Liuxin said ambiguously with a dark light flowing in his eyes. Yes, it's this maid. We seem to get along well. Coincidentally, Lady Mother doesn't have many servants by her side. I wonder if third brother can give her to me. Chu Liuxin talked nonsense with a serious face. There was actually no one to serve concubine Ming in the palace, and he, as her son, had to ask others for servants to serve her. So after saying this, Chu Liuxin's face also turned red. Chu Liuxin's eyes swept over his hand, which was still holding the servant girl's hand. Sensing Chu Liuchen's gaze on his hand, Chu Luchen immediately came to his senses. He hurriedly shook off the servant girl's hand, blushed, and stammered to explain, I want to pull her up. Chu Luchen waved his hand and interrupted him. Then he said slowly, okay. After saying that, he walked to the chair in the middle, turned around, and sat down. Before Chu Liuxin could understand what Chu Luchen meant, the servant girl had already kowtowed to him twice. Thank you, Your Highness. I will definitely serve you well in the future. After saying that, she wiped away her tears and stood behind him cleverly. So Chu Luchen gave this girl to him. At this time, Chu Liuxin suddenly came to his senses. He opened his mouth and wanted to explain that he actually just felt that the servant girl was pitiful and had no other meaning. Come and sit down. Chu Luchen reached out and pointed at the chair in front of him, motioning him to come and sit down. Chu Liuxin could only walk over and sit down dejectedly. Since I have given you a servant girl, you have to do something for me, right? Chu Luchen said lightly. What is it? Chu Liuxin's heart was also in his throat. His third brother was not as docile as he appeared to be. When they got along in private, Chu Liuchen's temper was the worst. When he was in a good mood, he would pay attention to you, but when he was unhappy, he was very vicious. Also help me send a gift to Imperial Grandmother. Chu Luchen tapped his fingers on the table a few times and said. Xiao Xuanzi smiled and handed over the tray in his hand. Your Highness, thank you. Chu Liuxin looked at the exquisite brocade box in front of him speechlessly and then looked at the servant girl beside him. He felt that he could actually go back on his word. He didn't want to go to the palace to see Imperial Grandmother at all. With Imperial Grandmother's character, she would definitely be very happy if his third brother gave her something, and then she would ask him to take the gift out of the palace. He was Prince Xian, not a messenger to send gifts. It would be impossible for him to find fifth Miss Xiao after coming and going. Third brother, I may have something to do. Chu Liuxin said hesitantly. What can it be? I have paid you. I have given you such a beautiful servant girl. Chu Liuchen's face darkened and his eyes were treacherous. Third brother, this is actually not necessary. Under the suppression of his treacherous eyes, Chu Liuxin's voice became softer and softer, and in the end, it was almost inaudible. Go quickly. Chu Luchen didn't seem to hear his resistance. He squinted at the gift box and said, I prepared this for Imperial Grandmother, and I carefully selected it. You can't break it, or Imperial Grandmother will be unhappy. Yes, third brother. Chu Liuxin had to give in. He stood up with his head drooped. After bowing to Chu Luchen, he sullenly asked Eunuch Liuzi to take the gift box and walked out with Eunuch Liuzi and the beautiful servant girl. He was in a very bad mood. It was not a good thing to have a beautiful servant girl for no reason. Moreover, he owed his third brother a favor, so he couldn't refuse it forcefully. Moreover, he had always been afraid to see Chu Luchen in the past. At this time, he owed Chu Luchen a favor, so he couldn't be tough. Your Highness, didn't you plan to send this gift box yourself? Why did you ask Prince Xian to send it? Seeing Chu Liuxin leave dejectedly, Xiao Xuanzi couldn't hide the doubts in his heart and couldn't help asking. In Chu Liuxin's opinion, this matter was temporarily prepared by Chu Luchen, but in fact, this gift box was really prepared by Chu Luchen a long time ago. There were good maple leaves specially selected for the Empress Dowager, and they had been specially tanned. These maple leaves had special uses, so they were more practical after being tanned. Anyway, he is very free. Let him send it. Chu Luchen said casually. His long eyelashes fluttered twice and then he raised his head. His eyes were cold and rippling. Even though Xiao Xuanzi had been following him, he had to praise his master again for being the most handsome man. Even if he just raised his eyes, he was already amazing. Even a woman couldn't compare with his appearance. Fortunately, there was still fifth Miss Xiao. Xiao Xuanzi felt that it was worth celebrating. He was Chu Liuchen's personal eunuch, so he could understand Chu Liuchen's behavior the best. But he felt that he didn't understand his master's meaning today. He sent a beautiful servant girl to Prince Xian and asked Prince Xian to send a gift to the palace. He was afraid that the Empress Dowager would reward him again in a while. One guest didn't bother two guests, so it should be sent by Prince Xian. Poor Prince Xian. I'm afraid that his legs will become weak after running here and there for a while. He didn't know how this Prince Xian offended his master today. Thinking about what his master was doing before, he thought. As if listening to the secret report of a secret guard, Xiao Xuanzi's eyes lit up. He suddenly understood. When the secret guard reported, he mentioned 5th Miss Xiao casually. He also said that 5th Miss Xiao met Prince Xian not at the gate of Duke Xing's mansion, but at Ningyuan Army General's mansion. At that time, he deliberately glanced at his master and found that his master's expression remained unchanged and his smile was still gentle. At that time, he secretly breathed a sigh of relief and thought that it was best that his master didn't notice it. Even if it was a chance encounter, it could only be at Duke Xing's mansion, not at Ningyuan Army General's mansion. It could be seen that Prince Xian deliberately kept an eye on 5th Miss Xiao. So, was His Highness jealous? Xiao Xuanzi secretly glanced at Chu Liuchen's face and felt happy. He didn't expect that his immortal-like master would have such a day, which really made Xiao Xuanzi feel fresh. Look, His Highness Prince Xian met 5th Miss Xiao by chance. The next moment, his master gave him a beautiful maid, and now he even sent him out to run errands. It seemed that he couldn't go back to find 5th Miss Xiao for a while. What's more, there was such a pestering and beautiful servant girl. My master is so jealous. I really thought that I'm a cold and otherworldly immortal. It's not that I'm otherworldly. After meeting 5th Miss Xiao, I've fallen from the 9th heaven and become immortal with flesh and blood. What are you laughing at? Chu Liuchen's slow words immediately made Xiao Xuanzi's face serious. He hurriedly raised his head and stuck out his chest to show that he was not secretly making fun of his master. I'm thinking about what gift 5th Miss Xiao gave you just now. Xiao Xuanzi said seriously. He really didn't see what gift was inside and was very curious. After his master received it, he didn't show it to him. Are you very curious? Chu Liuchen squinted at him and said lazily. No. I'm not curious at all. Xiao Xuanzi hurriedly shook his head. It doesn't matter if you're curious. Chu Liuchen was rarely easy to talk to. There was even a smile on his handsome face. The corners of his mouth were slightly raised, and his eyes were romantic and elegant. Xiao Xuanzi felt a chill on his back and said with a bitter face, Master, please tell me. You're tuning in to the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.